welcome to Philosofuture. I don't know that we've ever properly introduced what this is about, so let me just say this is a podcast about technology and the future of human flourishing is kind of how we describe it. However, that's a big bucket. A lot of stuff fits in there.
Yeah.
So, we're just as likely to talk about current events and politics as we are AI or Elon Musk.
Keto.
Yeah, just living well,
Yeah.
and things that are of interest. And just to be honest, like from a more conservative perspective.
Absolutely.
So if you're looking for some balance, or if you are looking to see what some of the better arguments might be for certain things, I feel like this is a good source.
Hop on the train.
Yeah.
So what news this week?
I've been paying attention to what's going on at SpaceX. Have you been
Oh, that was
tracking
so fun.
with Starship?
Yeah, that was.
Yeah.
I had been waiting for a long time.
Yeah. So you've been following just break down for everybody, like what's the deal with Starship? What are the goals? What happened this week?
Well, I'd like to go just a little further back.
Yeah.
The idea that one man's sheer force of will can compete with governments, and not only compete but beat them.
Right.
When he came in, I think they started in 2002, but probably really didn't enter the market until the 2012-ish, and into the launch market, space launch market, satellite launch. And he has captured, I think it's like 70-80% of all satellite launch market from Russia, the US, China. I mean, unbelievable what he's done. But for him, it's really, a tool to go to Mars, frankly. He wants us to be a multiplanetary species.
Yeah.
And so
for him, it's a missional thing. Like that's his mission.
It's a mission.
Doesn't he want to die on Mars?
Major.
Is that what he said?
I think he's mentioned that, but he's definitely pragmatic. And he's like, yeah, they've asked him, will you go on one of the first ones? He's like, nope, can't risk dying because we won't achieve our objective.
Yeah.
So he's pretty open about that.
Would you say that being obsessed with something like that is part of the key for actual big picture progress in society? Advancement.
Absolutely.
I like advancement better than progress.
I was talking just late last night with one of my sons, and about this concept. He's like, I have found he's right now working on stock market AI thing. And he said, I found I have to be like totally all in. I have to want to do it late into the night, and then you make a lot of progress.
Yeah.
If you don't want to be doing it and you just want to clock out at 5 o'clock, you don't like what you're doing, you aren't going to, you don't have a mission there. You need to and we changed that somewhere in life. It became about the paycheck and making money and less about the job satisfaction.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
And Musk has shown that it doesn't have to be that way.
Gee,
and
yeah.
you know what's funny?
He got both.
I heard somebody say this. I knew you would appreciate it. Something like, isn't it great that the government hasn't stolen all of Musk's money?
Right.
Because you hear that a lot from people. Well, if we just taxed all the billionaires or took all their money, run the government for...
They'd plow it into more decaying bridges and we wouldn't be multiplanetary.
Yeah, but literally, if he didn't have the resources that he's accrued, we wouldn't be doing this,
And not just that, but his effort to keep a public, speech square.
Right.
His effort to make paralyzed people be able to have articulation in robotics or work with a computer through their neural lace. That might be too far for some. But yeah, everything he's doing is pretty impressive.
Right.
Really impressive.
So Starship, from what I understand, I would like to follow this more, but you can fill me in. That is the big one, right? That's
the one. There's a great animation. So his idea is, hey, we have to get to Mars. In order to get to Mars, we need like 1 million people city or 100,000 people city to have a sustainable base, something like this. In order to do that, we need 10,000 rockets that carry 100 people each. And so he just works his way back. In order to make that work, you can't just have those rockets like we've done all through history through the last 50, 60 years. You can't have these rockets just be expendable.
Yeah.
Right? Because they're, The United Launch Alliance, which I think is like Boeing, Lockheed Martin, they are working on the Artemis moon program, and they have spent billions of dollars for one launch. And their engines, I think the engines are $60 million, okay, which is more than the best Russian engine, which people have been using, which is like $30 to $40 million. Musk has got his engines, the Raptors, down, I think it's like $300,000.
Wow, it's
Okay.
a big difference.
Well, it's like 100x or something crazy, 100x. And his thing is they can't be expendable. You have to reuse this. So you've all probably seen these, the Falcon 9 boosters landing,
Yeah.
sticking to landing, and they reuse those 10, 20 times. And so you take that 100x, you throw another factor of 10 or 20 on it, and it's like 1,000 to 2,000 times cheaper. I mean, that's shocking. What did change?
Goes to show there's a reason why Musk's stuff is successful. It's not a chance, it's not
No.
by chance that Tesla's doing really well. SpaceX is doing really well.
Yeah.
I mean, you call yourself a value engineer. It sounds like that's
So he's a value engineer, but he's also has, he just has this perfect right blend. He has the right risk tolerance, right? He's a little bit of a sociopath, maybe. He's a little bit got a little emotional, weird thing. His father was abusive, mentally abusive. He grew up in South Africa where he got beat up. I mean, to the point he was put in the hospital.
he's
You couldn't
built
recognize him.
for and on adversity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. He's built for and on it, and he takes it on. And he doesn't go out, with these small ideas. It's like no one's made a production automobile in the United States to compete with the big three for 100 years successfully. And he did it.
Yeah.
Right. And I think Model Y was the best selling car last year.
Right.
I mean, it's like, he took on the banks with PayPal. He took on the auto industry with Tesla, and he took on governments with SpaceX.
Yeah.
And seems to do well with all of them.
Right. And so with the Starship, I kept reading this is the third test or something, right?
This is the third test.
And the way that I saw it was covered in the mainstream media was like this was a failure. It splashed down.
It's so ridiculous.
Like it didn't, wasn't ultimately perfect.
And he doesn't go that way. His is about fail rapidly because you learn from failure.
Yeah. So they were testing like opening the payload doors and stuff, and that was successful.
Yeah, they call it the Pez door. It's
Okay.
they have this, the way they do their satellites is they look like Pez. They look like flat wafers. And so the Pez door opens and these things shoot out like Pez. It's really,
Funny.
he comes up with the funniest names for things. But no, it by no means was a failure. Their goal was to get successful separation of the booster and the main ship, get the main ship into orbit. And it did that, went all the way to the Indian Ocean. They got to the point where they tried to reverse it and do a soft landing, meaning turn the engine back on and soft land on the water, and they lost it. They think it's highly successful. I think it was highly successful.
Right.
But the only two issues they had, and it was with the booster as well, the booster was going to land, I don't know, maybe the Gulf of Mexico or something, which way does the Earth rotate? And it went for the soft landing. It separated fine. It turned. It fell back in, survived the fall, and then it turned to do a soft landing. And I don't think they weren't able to reignite the engines or something to have them land.
Yeah.
But I mean, at this point, it's already far better than anything we've. It was the largest man-made object ever put into orbit.
Interesting. See, that's a big deal. Like that's a
a
huge
deal.
That should be the headline right there.
Yeah, and
That's crazy.
Yeah, and it's okay. There's always naysayers.
You know what's interesting about the whole Starship thing? And I've seen some of the animations and it's cool. And you see like a bunch taking off and landing from Mars and from Earth. And, it's interesting. But there's something about it. We're still in that kind of, it's not crude, but it feels crude compared to like what you see in
Star Trek.
Yeah. And there's, even in Star Trek, they go back and look at the history of like the first warp drive and stuff. And it's like a crude moment, kind of like we have here where it's
Yeah.
still based on this sort of fuel and more of a rocket versus like,
Yeah,
you know, a sleek ship.
pass through the learning curve.
Yeah, but this is certainly as close to that futuristic scenario. No one else is anywhere near, not even on the trajectory.
Not even on the trajectory.
Yeah.
You know, and he just keeps upping the game. So when NASA put out bid, you know, so we're going to land on the moon again. Project Artemis, I think it is. And when they put out the bid, I think they had three, don't quote me on all this, but I think they had three bidders. I think they United Launch Alliance, which is the old-fashioned defense contractor stuff. And they have an animation of the moon, and they show the United Launch Alliance proposal basically, and it kind of looks like the Apollo lander, right? I mean, kind of looks like 1969 technology.
Yeah.
And then Blue Origin bid on it, which is Jeff Bezos' space
Right. I
company.
thought he was more into tourism. Is
Tourism,
he trying to
because,
shift?
because they can't do anything. So that animation of that one was, here comes this little capsule, and it looks kind of like the Apollo capsule, but it's rounded and smooth and looks more modern, right? And in both of these, it's like there's 4 people. I don't know what it is. You know, so they're small. They're the size of your room here. And then SpaceX, here comes Starship, and it lands and it towers and it's a couple hundred feet tall, and this ladder comes out and like 100 people get off. I mean, it's like not, and they won the contract, right? They won part of the contract.
It's just a matter of vision almost, you know, like you're dreaming too small on that side. But the other thing is, the flip side of that is, when people see what Musk is saying, I think they also believe he can do that, where they wouldn't think that somebody else could pull off that animation in real life.
Yeah, so you have to be able to, you know, Steve Jobs, the reality distortion field. You
Yeah.
have to be able to convince. Donald Trump's kids, you know, doesn't matter how you feel about Trump, his kids, I don't know if it was Ivanka or Don Jr., said, our dad told us growing up, if you're going to think, you might as well think big.
Yeah.
What a simple, great line, right?
That's
if you're going to
true.
bother thinking. And Trump, I think it was Norman Vincent Peale was his pastor growing up at church. And Norman Vincent Peale, if you don't know, is the author of How to Win Friends and Influence People, I think. So he's this power of positive thinking, maybe both of those. And I had read his books earlier in my life. And when I found out that Trump, that every Sunday he's listening to him for an hour or two, you know, it was like, it all clicked into place. It's like, that's what happened. He was brainwashed by this guy who's like, think big, right?
Yeah.
You want to be president, you can be president. Nothing else matters.
Right. And the reality is, I think for a lot of people, you are more capable than you think you are, or probably society has told you, and I think that's what Musk is epitomizing, you know. And on the flip side of that is probably what it takes to do that kind of stuff. Not everyone's willing to do, you know, like being capable is one thing, and you're capable of more than you think.
Sleeping on the assembly line for months.
Yeah.
He tears up when he talks about it. I mean, it was like,
Yeah.
it was like the low part of his life, but yeah,
Yeah.
you got to do it.
So just because I don't know, is Starship, is this the like end goal, or is there something beyond Starship that is the next phase for where things head? Or
Yeah, I don't know the answer. The last I knew that the plan. So he doesn't also build a Starship. He builds a factory that builds Starship. So they've already got 3 more waiting.
Interesting.
I mean, again, to the competition has spent, 8 years and cost overruns. I think they're up to $8 billion making one rocket.
Yeah. Could one of these function, do you think, as like a space station, more or less? Like, it doesn't have to go to Mars. It could just hang out.
One of the things they're doing is there's going to be refueling in space. So I think something that draws a lot of questions and ire in the space community is the plan to get to the moon. So, in the Apollo missions, it's like strap on one giant rocket, go all the way to the moon, separate, put one in orbit, have another piece fall, and go to the ground, go to the land. This is like the Starship goes up, it hits another Starship that's basically a refueling point. And then it goes and then it hits another one, and there's a refueling point. And I'm not sure why it has to do that.
It can't just go off of momentum.
I guess not.
Yeah.
But
So like a relay system.
Yeah. And who am I to question what they're doing. But there are experts who question that is not the
Yeah.
right way. But yeah, Musk, the animations show, hundreds of starships going to Mars,
Yeah.
taking hundreds of people.
Right. Next thing you know, there's a Tesla factory on Mars, and it's like a whole.
That's right.
Well, what are the implications if he gets set up and what did you say, 100,000 people are over there?
Maybe a million, I think.
A million people.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever it ends up being. I mean, then you're gonna have the Earthlings. You might have some people on the moon.
Yeah.
You got people on Mars. That's gonna sort of be like Darwin's finches and stuff. Like they're
they're-
going to develop in their own ways. Those
Yeah.
little societies.
And there's science fiction based on that, and how it's like they can't come back to Earth because the gravity crushes them, right?
Oh,
yeah, because
interesting.
they grew up in point 4, whatever the number is, gravity.
Huh.
So a lot to think about there. Yeah,
And it's almost like too. I imagine whatever's going on Earth is going to want to remain dominant. So like if he comes from the USA, obviously the US is going to want how it's almost like the LLM situation. If you're going to have AGI, can a smaller model control the bigger model? Can you retain that control? It's almost like that same situation, but planetary wise. Can the mothership here
Yeah.
on Earth control what's happening on Mars?
Yeah.
Could you even do that? Like, it's almost like it's a colony situation.
Yeah, I mean, you have war over it, right? There's books on that.
Yeah.
Science fiction books that Earth and Mars go to war because we're human and we're fallen. I'm going to go on that again. You can't get
Yeah.
away from that nature.
And you factor in the countries, and it's not even just Earth and Mars people. We've got the countries.
Interplanetary politics.
Yeah. That doesn't sound fun,
Yeah.
actually, does it?
There was a great series, is a great series called For All Mankind. Are you familiar with that?
I haven't seen it. I've seen the.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because they start back. It's an alternative future of space. Is that what they call it? Alternative history? Alternative history and alternative future, because it's going through. So each season is like a different decade. And so they have the Apollo. They have the 70s. And it's like Russia was first to the moon. And so we fight harder and we make a moon base. And so it's this really interesting, revisionist history. But politics enter there too. It's like, we have a confrontation on the moon with Russia, and then it just keeps on going.
Yeah.
We all live it and see it, and it's too bad we can't escape that. That it's baked into our proposed science fiction future.
Right. Yeah. It's weird because what people envision, like in sci-fi and stuff, that ends up impacting, number one, what people think is going to be possible. And number two, the way they go about it, wouldn't you say? So almost you're planting the seeds, whatever the cultural, you could almost call it propaganda, is going to be today for like tomorrow.
Yeah.
You're kind of steering the
You wonder
conversation.
how much. Yeah, you wonder how much of it is driven by, someone. If Musk grew up seeing Star Trek or something, how much is driven by the science fiction and what they read, and
Yeah.
is it a mirror or is it drive it?
Yeah. Yes, hopefully not a Black Mirror. Black Mirror, did you watch any of those?
I saw some of those. Yeah,
Yeah.
they're definitely thought-provoking. Being a techno-optimist, I like to see science fiction just for, perhaps things you haven't thought about, different ways of people look at it.
Have you thought about you describe yourself as a techno-optimist. The question, I guess, would be like, is there a time to be a techno-pessimist or...
Yeah.
And like, what's the balance? And I'll tell you, I'll give you
Tell
some.
me yours.
Well, I read about people this week talking about there was a conversation happening. Would you edit your genes to better compete with AI?
Yeah.
And so it's one thing if you're talking about a neural interface, and that we've had that discussion a little bit, but like going straight to the genes,
Yeah.
what's your take on that?
Weren't we just doing that 3 years ago with COVID?
Oh, yeah. Gene editing.
I mean, yeah. mRNA is doing some genetic stuff in your cell. I mean, that's who we are.
It's a payload system, right?
It's a gene therapy.
It's a clever system, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, to me, the promise of that is amazing. I love the idea, and the fact that we tooled out how to get it inside the cell with a lipid molecule attached, and the whole thing is great and amazing. But by goodness, like you better be careful. The more the deeper you go into the wiring, you better know what you're doing, right?
Yeah.
It's not like I'm gonna crack open your cranium and change one synapse with a fuse, like I'm changing a fuse. It's like I could ruin a lot of stuff, right?
Yeah, and you don't know until you know.
That-
It's the same thing with like back in the day whenever somebody started dissecting humans to like learn the inside, and someone probably was not cool with that and didn't want to see
No,
that.
yeah.
Yeah. You just don't know.
Yeah, so I think there's promise, and you should test it. But the idea of genetic engineering for improvement,
So, I mean,
the Uberman,
that's like biotech. So, I mean, what is your
there's got to be a line.
yeah, but you're not sure. Is it a case by case basis for you sort of like
Probably. I think I mentioned to you so I am struggling. I'm a techno optimist, but I also think like we're getting close to needing to break away, like I said, and start these neo Amish communities. But yeah, so probably my line is like not improving but repairing.
yeah, you mentioned that. That seems pretty interesting.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because that assumes there's a
It's easy to
form,
say
it's
now.
a good form, there's a design, a purpose, and you want to maintain that, not be so prideful to think that you can improve on it.
Yeah.
Is that kind of
I guess. But, like everything, there's a million gray areas, and it's like,
Yeah.
well, my binoculars are improving, right?
Yeah.
And so how far do I go in using, bringing that into my actual eyeball?
because binoculars enhance your
Right.
your vision, your capability. Yeah.
They improve it.
So one is a tool, and that's separate from your body. I guess is that part of the distinction?
That's kind of my line. Yeah, I
Yeah.
suppose.
You don't want to become the tool
I sup-
necessarily.
I suppose. As long as it's external. I don't know if you've seen these exoskeleton robots where it's kind of like, weren't there
Yeah.
some like movies, Transformers, or I don't know. Wasn't there some movie? I remember my kid was young and he really wanted to see Pacific Rim, which was, don't see it. We told him it was going to be the worst thing ever. It was the worst movie ever. But yeah, they like strap. In this case, they were giant robots, but they were inside and they were controlling them. And the nice, you can still walk out of that thing. That's probably line.
Temporary.
Integration.
It's temporary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. But we're gonna have to face that choice soon.
Yeah. Or I wonder, if we're going to have to face that, or if it just makes more sense to just let like a robot do stuff, and you stay human and let So did you see the Figma video this week?
Oh, it's
The
amazing.
update
Yeah.
So
was this the one with the apple?
with the Apple. So
Yeah.
what they've
Describe
done
it
is
if you haven't seen it,
they've integrated. I think it's
Their
OpenAI.
Chat GPT. Yeah.
Yeah, so you can talk to it now. It's a humanoid robot.
It speaks back.
Yeah, it detects there's
real-
stuff in front of
real
it.
time.
It can detect the food. It can put plates away.
Yeah. And it does inference. So it's like the user said, "I'm hungry," and here, let me grab you an apple. And
Right.
it looked at its surroundings, and there's plates, and but there's one apple. Okay, an apple will fix his hunger.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, hand me the apple.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, that's getting real close to C3PO, if you remember C3PO.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But see, that's kind of what I'm thinking. Like, if you have that level of robot
that'll
or
do it for you.
robots,
Yeah.
yeah, you've sort of it's the big robot suit you can get into without having to get into it. You just tell it what you want to have accomplished.
Yeah.
And,
Well, and that's what they when they project. There's people out there that project the total market for humanoid robots to be like, I don't know, 14, 15 billion. And the assumption is like X many in business, but 1 to 2 per house,
yeah.
right? I mean, yeah. I mean, that would be kind of nice, right?
But what
do my
happens?
laundry.
Yeah, but what happens when you want it to do something,
Like-
go get some food or something, or do something, and it has like an equity sub routine programmed in, and one day it gets an update and it says, "No, I can't help you with that.
I can't
That's not
help you.
equitable."
In fact, you don't own me.
Yeah, yeah,
You don't own me, or You know,
Right.
I need to kill to limit I need to equalize the proportion of ethnic races in the country, and so I need to
Yeah.
get rid of some of them.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's going to be a lot of trust before I have a machine that's stronger than me and somewhat autonomous, independent. There's got to be a lot of trust
Yeah.
there.
Yeah. I mean, that's exactly the case. And, we're pretty plugged into what's happening in the AI space. I'm not super aware of too many other people aside
Thinking
from you
about
and I
this.
thinking about it.
Yeah.
Because if your robot or your AI comes with a DEI policy hard coded in, baked in, and like you said, if you don't own it, because a lot of people are probably going to end up leasing these things like you do a car.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you don't
Absolutely.
own it, and even if you bought it, it's like I saw your car is spying on you. Did you see this? A lot of cars are
No.
spying on people and reporting the data to insurance companies,
Oh yeah.
causing
No. Yeah.
rates to increase.
I know about that.
Yeah. Well, what's the deal with that? Has that been going on for a while?
It's funny because 2002, I came up with this idea, and
I'm not surprised.
I went around to family and friends. I'm like, this is you need an insurance company that can detect with G sensors and whatnot your acceleration, et cetera, so they can cherry pick the best drivers, get lower rates, and it'll just wipe everybody else out because the bad drivers, they'll be on the other policies that cost them
Interesting.
a lot and you'll win. And then I think it was Progressive came out with a little dongle you plug in. So now is it baked into the cars?
It sounds like
Wow.
it.
Yeah, I can see that because it's all computer sent. It's all tied in now.
Well, I feel like the real discussion there has to do with data. And this probably goes back to the robot thing too.
This goes to TikTok too.
Well, yeah, companies are
same
making, yeah, they're making that's right. People are making so much money off your personal data and no one thinks about it because they get whatever free service or
Yeah.
whatever. But shouldn't you have some stake in the the
Well,
money
your-
being made off of
your stake is what you're getting, right? Gmail's free,
Is there a chance to disrupt
Google's
that?
free, but
Could you come out with a model that prioritizes like, hey, you should have a say in your data and you're going to get paid some if you share it?
I don't know a lot about that. There was a lot of talk, 5, 8 years ago, when with Bitcoin, with blockchain, and talking. There was a web browser that trying to remember the coin, but it was basically a web browser, and fractions of a cent per page. You were basically winning from browsing the web
Yeah.
because you saw ads, but instead of the advertiser getting all the money or the content,
Got it cut.
was shared.
Yeah.
And you could only do that with blockchain because, a transaction on Visa is 15 cents plus 3%
I see.
or 2%.
Yeah.
Whatever. So it's really.
So someone
requires
tried
that technology.
this.
Yeah. There's
It
been
must not
some
have gone
efforts.
anywhere.
Well, it's not big enough to be on our radar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. But I mean,
It-
your Alexa's listening. Everything's listening.
What if that is part of the future? We've talked about in the future with AI, with robots, if there's not much left for humans to do except consume stuff.
Just Wally, right?
Yeah, is that how
Wall-E.
is that really the real universal basic income, so to speak? Is like,
I mean, I've had this talk with people before. It's like, is the goal dopamine squirts? And, because everything's just, and that seems like the trajectory we've been on, there was a Disney Wall-E or Pixar Wall-E is a step there until eventually you're just, a brain in a jar getting squirted.
I was thinking a little bit more about this. We've talked about this pretty in depth, but in the future, let's say all the jobs are automated away or whatever. And I was thinking about this because I was thinking about what does AI let you do now? And one of the answers is it helps you automate, So just even from a productivity standpoint, if I want to get more done, I still have the same 24 hours in a day. I can now, if I know what I'm doing, do more with AI by far, But there's going to come a point where it's like, well, I'm a person and I want to do something. What do I want to do? And then I'll set about doing whatever that is. And maybe it's just for the fun of it, or maybe it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah. You spawn a thought there. There was a comedian in the 80s, it might have been Richard Pryor. Can't remember who it was. basically talking about alcohol or drugs, and saying they basically accentuate your personality. If you're a jerk, you're going to be a bigger jerk, you know. And I think about that right now with AI. Probably it lets seekers, people interested in learning and knowledge, learn more, seek more. And it lets, hedonistic people, it'll probably let them be more hedonistic.
Yeah.
It's probably a divergence in
So,
I don't even know what axis that would be, but
yeah.
yes.
Do you think it comes down to personality type? Because I saw this news article, maybe you saw this. I don't even know where this was, but there was a police chief or somebody telling residents, we've had a lot of break-ins, people are kicking in doors, and why don't you just start putting the key fobs next to the door so they can get what they're after and not come in?
They want your car.
Yeah.
They'll break into your house to get it, so you just leave it out.
Yeah. You might as well just leave that
Where
thing
was
gassed
that?
up, turned on.
I saw that. Where was that?
I don't know. I'm not sure.
That is so appalling.
Well, but I'm thinking like personality-wise, someone out there might be like, oh, do I need to do that? Okay, let me leave the... And somebody else can be like, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to take every security measure that I can.
That disgusts me.
Yeah.
That is...
So personality type.
I mean, what are you if you aren't law and order? What's the point of government, right?
Well, that comes back to equity, right?
Oh, my goodness. So speaking of government, TikTok, are you following?
Yeah, we got to talk about that.
Yeah.
I haven't really read the bill, have you?
No, pieces of it.
Okay. What's the upshot?
Yeah, the upshot is a long story short. China has the algorithm back there. The data stored here.
It's not just an algorithm. It's like the world's most powerful, persuasive manipulation.
Yeah, it is.
Wasn't
there something like a year or so ago where there was some kind of a disorder, psychological disorder, and then they found out it was TikTok?
Yeah.
People were doing twitching or something.
Maybe.
Do you remember about that?
That seems to...
Yeah.
So China, I saw China put out a thing. I think the bill is basically like, hey, ByteDance, you can divest of any Chinese ownership and sell it over here or not. And China came out with a statement, right, that said, hey, this isn't fair. And then somebody pointed out, well, Twitter, now X, is not available, in China. Facebook.
Oh, yeah.
All these Western companies are not. So it's not a...
We've been over backwards. Google, I mean, it's a little sickening how much our supposed altruistic U.S. tech companies are when they go to China, and they bend over backwards to meet their censorship. And
right.
Yeah.
So there's got to be two plays here, right? It's either the U.S. wants control of this apparatus for themselves. They don't want China in control of it. That could be one play. Or another play could be an extra dark one, which would be like, hey, TikTok first, then X later. Or, the bill, if the bill is sufficiently generic.
Yeah, if it's vague, they'll use it against
whatever. You can wield it.
Anybody who disagrees. And we saw that,
in
2020 in that election.
It could come down to any website, almost. Wasn't that some of the... And there were some carve-outs. Yeah. There was some carve-outs that sounded almost like a Yelp type of a website. Like somebody with some insider knowledge said, leave me alone in the bill,
Yeah. It's interesting because I definitely don't want... I find communism, or totalitarianism in China bad, and human rights violations, and I don't want them... I think they are an existential threat to us, to the world. And you don't want them spying on us, control, and it may even be, like you said, it's even beyond spying. It's like influencing elections.
Sure.
Right? That's they can easily do that. If elections are decided by a point, or two, and you have, I think they have 160 million users in the U.S.
Well, they unleashed the TikTok user base against the country, basically saying, hey, they framed it to all the TikTok users, and then they were speaking out on behalf of,
Yeah, I didn't see that.
Yeah, and there's a reason why somebody like the Biden administration contacts a bunch of TikTok influencers to drum up support for their campaign, because there's influence to be had.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the bigger thing. Now, the thing that gives me pause is I am a big Rand Paul guy.
Rand and Ron. Which one's the... Ron was the older.
Ron's the father. Rand's the current senator.
Okay.
And he's very libertarian.
Right.
I find that he's probably, when I look at congressmen look at politicians, there's not a lot of them that I think are altruistic, that are just totally about defending the Constitution, looking out for us. He's one of those guys. Like, you can just see he's comfortable in his skin. He's honest. He's just tells it like it is. And my views align with his a lot. And he voted against the bill to divest the Chinese interest in TikTok. And when asked about it, he's like, basically what you're saying is like, there's something called the First Amendment, freedom of speech, the ability. So I'd have to look more deeply into his argument. So I'm not ready to.
Plus, you're more of a free market guy.
I'm a free market guy, but that has bounds internationally, right? I don't. That's an evolution. So in my 20s and 30s, I was a globalist, free market, international trade, low tariffs, etc. And it really wasn't until Trump's timing, where Trump was fighting China and putting tariffs on, and actually, let me step back. There's Pat Buchanan, might be too old for you. He was a politician in the 80s, wrote a lot of books, and he was very isolationist. And so it's like I align totally with Pat Buchanan, but he must be wrong on this. And it's one of these pretense of knowledge when you're young.
Yeah.
It's like, well, who am I who thinks about this for an hour once in a while versus this guy who spends his whole life on it? And if I agree with almost all this stuff, why don't I think more deeply about what he's talking about? So it wasn't until I was older that I thought more deeply about it. And the argument I make is like, okay, let's say ISIS makes the best scarves in the world or best rugs.
Right.
Do you think it's okay for us to be sending them tons of money buying their scarves and rugs so that they can buy more bombs and kill more people? No. I mean, that's evident, right?
Yeah.
So,
but you're basically saying put your money where your ethics are, basically. But what happens when your government
is putting it for you?
Yeah. I mean, almost in some cases, like the China threat is real and bad, but sometimes it feels like the government as it is right now, like is almost a worse threat to its citizens in some instances.
It kind of does feel that way. And we feed the beast, it's tax season, and it gets me to feed that beast because I think it's not that helpful of a beast. Right.
Yeah.
Do you have more, how much more comfortable or how many more benefits do you get from the government now than 40 years ago or 50 years ago or 30 years ago? And yet they're spending twice as much.
Yeah.
Okay. What's up?
Yeah. When I was younger, and even just like, I don't know, probably 5 years ago, I had never thought about much of this stuff. It all became more relevant to me recently. And just the idea of having less government, when you don't know a whole lot and you haven't thought about it, you're like, well, why would we need government to do certain things? You don't think about it.
Right.
And you don't understand that what you're doing when you add government is taking away your personal.
There's an opportunity cost.
Yes.
Yeah.
You're not even able to rely on yourself as much. The more layers of government that you add in. Yeah. So obviously you have to have some, and then you start to think about, well, do I want more or do I want less? And that's what you're talking about. What are the benefits?
Right.
Do you have more?
There's two sides of the equation. They do some good.
Yeah.
Absolutely, right? But you got to look at the whole picture and decide what the right level. It's like you do for yourself.
Yeah.
What is the right level of spending? Should I spend exactly what I make? Should I spend 10% less? Should I spend more and have credit card debt? You have to think about that. And it feels like they don't do a good job of that on Capitol Hill.
Yeah, and then you end up in these situations. There was a huge debate going on about entitlements this week. And I think Ben Shapiro sparked off a huge conversation, and this was happening. And so everyone was talking about it. But regardless of how you feel about it, there's so many people on entitlement programs now that if you are the bad guy that takes it away, even if it was necessary at some point, I mean, people are going to call you evil. So obviously the best thing would not to be to get into any sort of mess in the first place. We're way past
ship has sailed.
We're way past that. People were calling it like a Ponzi scheme.
Oh, it is a Ponzi scheme.
Yeah. So how do you fix something like that?
I don't know. I have to look at Greece again. Greece kind of hit the wall, 10 years ago. had to put in austerity measures, and yet, they were bankrupt, and yet
remind me.
the students protested, and they were burning furniture,
Yeah.
no, for heat, actually. They
Oh,
were so,
really?
yeah, things were getting so bad.
Because no other countries would give them a loan anymore. Is that what the deal
Yeah,
was?
I think that was, they're part of the...
It's like a bad
they're
credit
part
risk.
of the EU, and
Okay.
the EU, there's another topic to talk about sometime. What a disaster. Basically, Germany screwing the whole southern part of Europe. Anyway, yeah, I don't know that you can fix it because you get so many people dependent on it, right?
So
it's
do
almost
you
like
have
this,
to go belly up like Greece?
I don't even know if it worked. Yeah, do you have to become Venezuela? Is there a way out? I don't know if the pendulum swings. But what I think about is a bad relationship where you have, mentally abusive partner who creates dependence. So that person can't get out of the relationship.
Right.
That's what I feel we have with the government.
That's an interesting comparison.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you think of countries or governments like people, it really lets you. It's a good lens, I think.
Yeah.
Because it is very similar to that, and that's an interesting way to look at it. But personally, like if you were a person and you were spending way more than you had, and you basically deserve and would have to go bankrupt. Then you're going to have hard times ahead.
And, yeah. We don't have debtors' prisons anymore, but...
And is it basically just U.S. is so big, like who's going to do anything about it, kind of a thing? Like from
That's
like,
it, right? Most of the world's transactions are denominated in the dollar.
But people still loan us money.
People are still buying our bonds.
Why?
And because we are still, if you look at the world, and I've been through this, it's like, where do you want to put your money? Where's the safest spot? Because we still kind of come down to it.
Is it because everyone's still interdependent upon the U.S., not just the dollar, but, like China can't overly screw us too much because...
if you think about it, let's say you had $1 million that you wanted to invest, and you have the luxury of investing anywhere in the world. Where are you going to do that? South America, probably not. A lot of chaos and strife in Argentina, Venezuela, Brazil. It's all kind of crazy. It's like, what's going to happen to my money, right? Europe, the EU, a lot of bad things in some of the countries, the EU's, it's a pretty tough situation. Maybe Switzerland, they're pretty fairly stable. And I think they bowed out of the currency part of the EU. China, you're definitely not going to invest. I know people who do invest in China, but it seems like a big gamble. Japan was hot for a while. Now they've had like 15, 20 years of dead money. The U.S., we're still kind of the beacon for now.
Yeah.
For now.
So if and when that tips and things go really south, I guess
it might
how
go
would
fast.
How would that play out? People just stop loaning the U.S. money?
Yeah.
Or it turns into a Greece situation?
It's not a binary thing, right? It's the cost of the T-bills, the interest rate on the T-bills goes up, right? And the treasuries on the bonds that we sell to our people or internationally to finance the government.
Yeah. So solve the mystery. Why does the U.S. keep spending this money that we don't have? And how can we do that? You shouldn't be able to do it, but we do
phrase,
it.
Did you tell me this phrase, or did I hear this somewhere? It's not that power corrupts. It's that it's a magnet to the corruptible.
Yes, I saw that.
That's a great line.
Okay, so there's corruption. Okay, but how literally can we spend money that we don't have? Like, where's it coming from?
We sell more bonds. We get money.
Who's buying and why? Like, that's what I'm saying.
Well, so I own some bonds.
Buy. So you're part of the problem.
When you buy. I'm trying to think if in a derivative way, if you buy a certificate of deposit at the bank, if that's going to the Fed. But it's the system. I guess
because we have a giant military.
We trust.
We got nukes.
It's all based on trust in the fiat currency.
Yeah,
we trust that my $10 will be worth approximately $10 next year.
Yeah,
that's what it comes down to. And there's not as many places you can say that about.
I see.
So that's all.
It just is what it is.
It's trust.
Yeah,
and you know how trust works, though, right? You can lose it fast.
You can lose it, but it feels like, though, I think to the average citizen, it feels like it if there's no negative consequences, a lot of people probably don't perceive that there's been a huge consequence to them personally. Maybe they feel it, but they can't connect all the dots for our country spending all these bills, all the Ukraine
Yeah.
bills. It's like,
Be-
that sounds like a lot of money, but
because,
then,
because they've been the benefit of it. It's John McCain called it intergenerational theft, which I thought was a great elucidation of the concept. It's we're borrowing. I mean, think about if you could borrow basically any amount of money right now, and your children had to pay the debt when you were gone, and you didn't really care about the children.
if you didn't care about the children, that would be,
It's like I can live pretty well,
yeah.
right? And my friends and family around me today, i.e., the U.S. citizens, they're going to enjoy that living, right?
Yeah. See, but now that feels like another instance of. I feel like one way to describe, people on the left is like, let's get rid of consequences, right?
Yeah. Personal responsibility, no personal responsibility.
Yeah, and it feels like that is a good way to think about it. And I think that Janet Yellen and some of the people in charge actually have a term for this, that some sort of modern school of economics, they've termed it, where you basically can just borrow infinitely. It doesn't matter. Yeah, there is this thing called inflation, but your average person just, they don't have the time to think about it. They're going to feel the effects maybe. What are they going to do about it? And I guess that's where you talk about corruption.
Yeah. I mean, it used to be the budget was talked about intensely in the 90s, 80s, 90s, probably early 2000s. It seems like it's kind of not talked about as much anymore.
Yeah.
And the Republican Party used to be, the stewards of trying to spend less. They might have spent more on military, but overall, and we did, Gingrich pushed really hard and got the balanced budget in the mid 90s. We spent what we took in.
Yeah.
And that's a start. But if any of us, I mean, you should spend less than you take in so that you can prepare for a rainy day, right? I mean, and they didn't do that. When now we're so far beyond, we can't even get close to balancing the budget.
Yeah.
If that interest rate, to that point, if that interest rate goes up, all of a sudden we're spending, we have 33 trillion in debt. So, and we're paying really low, I don't know what the blended rate is, 2 or 3%. So we're spending $600 billion a year in interest. But if that goes up to 8%, all of a sudden we're spending 2 to 3 trillion in interest.
Right.
Which our whole government revenue, federal government revenue, is like 3.5, 4 trillion. So it's like all of a sudden you can't pay anything. You can't pay welfare, Medicare, military, roads.
Yeah.
Because you're paying interest.
Yeah. Now,
So
at what
that's
point?
what happens
At
when
what
we
point
lose trust.
is that a national defense conversation?
Yeah.
Because if I'm China, I'm like, this is perfect. This is great. It's a ticking time bomb.
Yeah.
Weak in America. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's an old saying, if you owe the bank a little bit, it's your problem. If you owe the bank a lot, it's their problem.
I like that.
Right? Because they have to get you to pay somehow if you just throw up your arms. So the fact that a lot of our debt is held internationally and China owns, I think it was 9% or something, I can't remember, but which is, a couple $1 trillion. That's kind of a big deal. So we have this power, and this is what I've thought for a long time they'll do, and we'll see what happens. But we have the power, since we print the money, we can deflate or inflate the currency and make their debt worth less. Right?
Right.
So we can just basically monetize the debt by printing more. It hurts us.
Yeah.
If you hold U.S. bonds, it hurts you. It's a bad thing, but it's better than 700,000 soldiers with guns that don't get their paycheck from the army.
Yeah.
This week.
It seems like that sort of thinking though is sort of problematic on the long term, because we sort of tried to screw Russia with sanctions and stuff, and it seems like it actually didn't really harm them all that much and divorced them from the dollar a little bit more.
Yeah. Well, they're a big producer of food and petroleum, and they have pretty good. You're in good shape if you aren't dependent on other countries,
Right.
right? You're in pretty good shape if things go south, which
Yeah.
they probably will go south. There's some good books on it. Money Wars. There's a good guy, Peter Zion, who used to be with Stratford. He's a global strategist, thinker. Talks a lot about the subject. And if you are the U.S., we have a couple of things. We can be energy independent. We were when Trump left office. First time since the 70s, I think. We produced more petroleum than we used. We have, you know, we're the breadbasket. The Midwest is the breadbasket of North America. We export a ton. So we have this ability. And then the missing component, which people have talked about for a while, is labor, cheap labor. Well, we have Mexico, right? So that's actually a bonus for us. I think we're going to have humanoid robots faster than, a lot of this. So I think I'm not terribly pessimistic on our future. Doesn't mean there won't be pain, but I don't think we're going to be looking at Mad Max or Waterworld or whatever
Yeah.
future.
Interesting.
Again, the optimist.
Yeah.
Me.
Yeah. What's funny is the thought just occurred to me. We've got 8 to 10 million new. They call them new Americans. Now. It's not even illegal.
Newcomers.
Biden actually apologized for saying that this
I saw
person
that.
was an illegal alien.
In his State of the Union?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's sort of akin, I think what a lot of people don't realize, and Musk pointed out, is when you look at the census data,
Oh.
it just counts people in the territories, and then that affects voting power. So
Yeah.
it's not about are you a citizen or not. And there's a reason why
Yeah.
that wording has been fought by the Democrats to be kept out of the census. So
I forgot about that for a long time.
you're talking about robots. Maybe the Republicans then need to counter by saying, "Hey,
Count robots
this is
in
a
the
Republican
census.
robot."
That's funny. It's a that's a big deal people should know about. And I forgot about it for a long time. You get caught up in this, okay, well, they're really trying to let them vote.
Yeah.
And change the elections. Deeper than that is when you carve up your number of representatives in the House and Congress, you do that by population. Population, as you mentioned, is not naturalized citizens. It's all people.
Mm-hmm. And
all of a sudden, the states that they come into get more votes. So that's why California, their Immigration Act of the whatever it was, the 70s, it just exploded the population. They get 35, however many, 70, I don't even know, congressmen. It's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Right. And I think within the last week and a half, I was called a conspiracy theorist by somebody I know just discussing this.
Only once in the last week and a half?
Yeah.
You're not trying
That's
hard
how many
enough.
people I talk to.
You're not trying hard enough.
But yeah, it's just.
What was your because of this topic? The Great Replacement conspiracy theorist?
Because of that, and also just DEI policies. I was talking to someone and they said, well, Chris, that sounds like a conspiracy theory. I'm like, this isn't a conspiracy theory. You go look at any major corporation. They have a DEI policy and they're proud of it. The media will cover it.
They have job positions. They have titles.
Departments.
They have a chief diversity officer.
That's right.
CDOs,
but it's a conspiracy theory. It's
yeah. It's just a quick way to brush something off without having to think about it.
Yeah. I shouldn't even bring this up because it's not worth discussing really, but I saw Advil has a new display somewhere for pain equity.
Pain equity. Yeah.
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 It's just seeped in everywhere to the point of, I think your average person, even if you tend to be on the left, like you're probably seeing some of the stuff coming out and being like, this is off. This doesn't.
I don't know though. I mean, so I'm going to bring up again, if you haven't read it, The Parasitic Mind by Godsod.
Yeah. I've read some of that.
Yeah. So great example of this. I saw an interesting, I'm one who likes the psychology experiments. I saw an interesting experiment about this.
This is going to be a frog or a crab or something.
Rats.
Rats.
Okay. This is a new one with rats. And it's this box, plexiglass box with a tube, little PVC tube at the top, seeds outside the box, and seeds inside the box. And so let out a bunch of rats. All the rats come. They're milling about eating the seeds till one rat gets brave enough to go up there. He goes in the PVC, falls in the box. Right? Now he's in there, and all his buddies can see he's in there, and he's trapped. Right? They all dutifully line up, and they all march in the box and fall in, except 10% of them, like 2 out of 20 don't do it. And you just have this mass of 20 rats stuck in this thing. All they all got the mind virus. But the parasitic mind, it's a good book, and you're right. DEI is a parasitic idea that has just seeped. You use the word seep. It's a good word.
Yeah. I mean, once things in corporations and government reach a certain point, are they going to be quote unquote rescuable? We talked about Musk said laws never die, people die, laws never die, and there's no sunsetting mechanism for so you could get a president in or somebody who might try to make some. Is it so far gone that's the worry? We were never supposed to have a system where 51% of the population could oppress the other side. That was never. So even if you like, progressive policies, and stuff, if you have any humanity and you have to live next to your fellow neighbors that don't agree, what are you doing? What are you doing? I don't understand.
I don't understand either. It's the tyranny of the majority, right? So
Yeah.
It's not new. It was recognized when they founded the country. And we're really dependent on the Constitution and the Supreme Court to protect that, because I don't see it being protected in Congress. We weren't supposed to, there was in the Wilson's era in the early 1900s, it was a terrible time. We didn't have an income tax, right? They didn't want an unapportioned income tax because they saw what would happen. And he got that income tax through in, I think, 1913 maybe. One of the things that happened at the same time is, I don't know what mechanism, if it was I don't know if it was a bill, federal bill, whatever it was, laws changed around senators. The whole idea for senators is they were appointed. They weren't elected. And the idea behind a republic is that you have these kind of reasoned, educated people in the middle, traditionally men in that day and age, that would buffer this mob mentality of the... So it's not full democracy. When I hear people say we're a democracy, it's like, no, we aren't. We weren't intended to be. We're supposed to be a representative republic. That changed. So they're just elected. And what do you do if you're running for campaign? You just try to bring back the pork to your constituents. If I give them more money, more roads, more bridges, more projects, then I'll get more votes and I'll get reelected.
Yeah.
That's what it's about now.
Ooh, and speaking of votes and taxes, I don't know if you caught this, but Biden's touting his billionaire tax.
No,
bill.
I didn't
Did you
see
this?
that.
So it basically amounts to
Not being a billionaire, I can ignore that one.
Right, for now.
For now. First they came for the what's that old the Jewish thing from the ghettos, from the Holocaust. It was first they came for so and so, and I didn't say anything.
Oh yeah.
And at first they came for them, and then they came for, and I didn't say, and then it was too late.
Yes, but also I'm saying in the future, I
Yeah.
fully expect you to be a billionaire.
But
both of those.
I'm not taking the optimist approach. I was taking the pessimist approach.
Yeah, but so basically what it amounts to is he's trying to have a way to tax unrealized gains.
Oh yeah.
So if you have an asset and it's worth a lot of money, but you haven't sold it, it's not liquid money in your bank account.
Yeah.
He's wanting to tax that.
That's genius.
And
ask that to any. I don't think I know any billionaires, but ask that to anybody who's worked in a tech company who has options from the tech company, who has some kind of liquidity event and has to pay taxes now, and it's just a mess. Yeah, that's ridiculous.
But you called it brilliant. Because if he's pitching that to...
No, when I say brilliant, I'm saying like idiot satirically.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But I mean, it's if you're catering to a base and you're like, hey, you can demonize, hey, this isn't going to affect you at all.
Oh, they've done that forever.
Yeah.
So what I saw in my lifetime is the division politics used to be rich versus poor, class warfare. And what happened in the 80s is all the boats lifted. Everybody did really well. And that kind of died away. The 80s and 90s, you didn't hear that much. So then the division went back to race. And it became, a race identity politics issue. And now they just keep making smaller and smaller divisions, gay,
Atomized.
LGBTQ,
Everyone's getting atomized.
transgender, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're just rehashing an old argument, an old trope that.
But yeah, we just talked about this at the beginning of the episode. It's a good thing that something like that hasn't happened to like a Musk who's out there trying
Right.
to
His-
send people to Mars.
He was the richest guy in the world 2 months ago, whatever it was, 6 months ago. And he is now third. He's lost, I don't know, $60 billion
Yeah.
of net worth. And if he had been taxed at the top, well, that's not fair.
Right.
It's worth a third less.
Yeah.
Right? Or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's yeah.
Do you know who Ryan Sean Adams is?
No.
He's big into crypto stuff, but he had this to say about it, and this is what's crazy. It says, it seems one major implication of this is that founders would have to give up control and governance of companies they create as the company grows. So, in other words, Zuckerberg owns 53% voting power of Meta, ownership control, but maintaining majority ownership would be impossible in a world where unrealized capital gains are taxed. So, as early as 2005, he'd have had to sell Facebook shares each year to pay taxes, diluting his control up to 25% each year. So if this regime was in place, he would expect Zuckerberg would have lost majority control by the late 2000s.
Yeah. I mean,
It doesn't matter if you like Zuckerberg or not. I mean, this disincentivizes even starting a company. It
Yeah, but
shoots innovation in the foot.
they just pull on the heartstrings and emotions, and they have enough, and it's unfair.
Right.
And and if you only can think one level deep, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I think I mentioned that Rush song to you.
You did talk a little bit about Rush.
The Trees. I think it's called the Trees.
You didn't tell me the
Trouble.
song though.
It's called the Trees. Yeah, it's.
Do you still listen to Rush?
No, I don't.
Okay.
I don't listen to a lot of music anymore. I was a big music aficionado for years and years.
I only know Rush from the Goldbergs, but go ahead.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, yeah, the idea of that behind that song is the maples are crying oppression because the oaks are too lofty and they take up all the sunlight. And so there's this big strife in the forest, and it goes on. And then the end of the song, now they're all kept equal by hatchet, chain, and saw. So they just cut them all down.
Wow, that's actually really descriptive.
Rush, the drummer, his name was Neil Peart. Very interesting. They're kind of a cool group because I was in this. It was kind of hard rock for me. I wasn't probably the biggest fan, but a roommate got me into it in college. And they're three guys from Canada that didn't have conflict or break up the band or any of these. They, until the drummer died, they were like 50 years together. Mm-hmm. But the drummer was kind of a philosopher and has some
Sounds
really
a bit conservative.
amazing. Yeah, I don't know his politics. I actually don't know. He's Canadian, so probably not.
Oh, those lyrics certainly fit today.
Yeah, no, it's a great. You should go read the. It take you 3 minutes, listen to the song. It's really interesting. But they saw that that was probably late '80s, mid '80s. So yeah, you can't pull people down to keep everything equal.
Right. Yeah, we've
To
talked
lift
about this
people
before.
up.
If you're free, if everyone's free, you're not equal. If everyone's equal, you're not free.
Yeah,
That's
so we have
what
to
it comes
keep
down
in
to.
mind. Yeah,
Did you hear Jaguar's shutting down?
the car company.
Yeah. Sounds like customers were getting notified that, hey, this thing you had on order, it's not going to happen.
Oh no,
yeah.
Are they part of Ford? I think.
Seems like last I knew.
Yeah.
But yeah.
That's interesting. What a great brand.
Yeah. Was it just mismanaged, do you think? Did it have to do with the EV?
It was an English car.
People used to say they weren't very
There's nothing more less reliable.
reliable.
Than
That's
an
what I was going to
English
say.
Car. Yeah, yeah. Funny.
I feel like the Jags that I've seen driving around lately have really lacked like any style.
Yeah.
Do you feel like that?
It's funny. There's a model of car that looks like all the other model of cars. There's like this Hyundai. I can't remember.
Tucson
I
or
couldn't
something.
They all look the same, and it's like you almost
Yeah.
can't tell which brand it is
Right.
anymore. But
I
Yeah,
feel like
end of
that's
an
been
era.
happening across society. You see a lot of logos getting redesigned to just like stark, minimal, like losing all personality.
Yeah.
I think you see that in architecture too, but I think you see it in the car thing. Yeah. Until Musk came out with the Cybertruck and blew that up.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you see the bullet testing?
I
That
know.
a new round of bullet testing. They took it all the way up to a 50 caliber, which
Wow.
which
Did it go
definitely
through?
definitely penetrated. Definitely,
It did.
yeah. But they shot, it took the 9 millimeter with no problem.
Wow.
And repetitively, if they shot at the exact same spot over and over and over again, they could get a crack. But yeah,
Wow.
very very cool. I mean, again, just someone thinking big and different
Yeah.
is fun.
Yeah. Which I guess it's just funny because I almost would have considered a Jaguar a while back, just because, and I almost felt like we've had this discussion also. It's not that flashy if you
Yeah.
get the right model.
Yeah.
Like it's pretty under the radar, but So, anyways, another one bites the dust. But it's just kind of weird because there's a lot of brand cachet there. Like everyone knows Jaguar and probably thinks of it as like a nice brand.
Yeah.
And I think there was some speculation. Well, what's your speculation? What could possibly rise from the ashes of Jaguar biting the dust?
Meaning, what brand could take
What-
their place as the high end?
Well, yeah, I mean, like what? There's
don't
going to
know.
be some assets there. You got the brand.
Yeah,
Someone can come along and pick up the pieces.
yeah, maybe.
I would guess a Chinese car company might come in.
Yeah,
and-
probably. Yeah, I mean that would be. They did that with Lenovo. Did that with IBM.
Yeah.
ThinkPad. Right.
Same thing, I bet.
Yeah, probably. Speaking of that Chinese, the BYD's really blowing it up. As a Tesla shareholder, I watch that fairly closely.
BYD, I'm
BYD
honestly
is the
not-
largest electric car maker in China,
Okay.
and they have a model for $11,000
And when you say model,
a car.
like a small sedan, a very small sedan.
Yeah, very small sedan.
Like, does it look like a Mini Cooper small?
It looks not that small.
Honda Civic, maybe?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay.
You can look it up. I can't remember the name of it, but just look up BYD low price car.
Okay.
But we're going to have some political issues there too soon. It's like, I'm sure we're going to have a tariff, trade war over that.
Because you think
They're
that,
going to want to come into the United States
okay.
in the next year, 3 years, 2 years probably.
And you could see
they're
with-
going to, well, I mean, an $11,000 car. Are you kidding?
With the
Electric
agenda.
car, no gas.
Yeah.
That's going to be a huge seller.
Probably depends who's president. You could see Biden saying, give me that
Totally
right
depends,
now.
Which is why I think Musk and Trump met last week. Did you notice that?
No, I didn't see that.
Yeah.
I heard people asking if Elon was donating to Trump, and he said no.
Yeah, I think they met.
Okay.
I could be wrong. I was hoping he'd ask
So
him
what's your
for-
take on the BYD
I want
thing?
him to be VP.
That would be, yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's just another example of do you fund foreign countries that
Yeah.
probably are threats or don't have good human
Well,
rights.
I have to ask my initial.
But everything we have on our table, everything we have.
Yeah.
From Mike's, I mean everything is
Right.
made.
The chips,
So
manufacturing.
we're doing it.
Yeah. But so when you say that and you talk about there's this car company and they're really competitive, how much of that is built off of American technology? And the reason I ask is,
Yeah.
the arrangement that the Chinese government always makes is like you need to form a new company over here and we get a huge chunk. I don't know if it's majority. Okay. And then how much of the
Tesla got them out of that, by the way.
Oh, they did.
They're
I always
like-
thought that they were in.
I think that
they
was
had that.
They're
And I
in,
wondered
they're
about
in
that.
China, but they wouldn't open if China
Interesting.
had majority
Interesting.
ownership.
Now, did China
I
just
don't-
by having a
who
factory
knows?
over there? Does China know it all anyways?
I'm
like
sure
everything.
of course they are. I
Yeah.
mean, they're stealing it. You saw, wasn't there news out this week that Stanford Chinese were stealing?
Yeah,
secrets
there
from
was,
Stanford.
Somebody, yeah.
Yeah.
Again, this
I mean,
happens.
Of course you're
a
going to
lot.
do that. Of course they're going to do that.
Yeah.
In business, when you're starting a new business, you try to learn as much as you can about your competitors.
Right.
Now where's your moral line at spying or doing things, honeypot schemes or extortion
Right.
or bribery?
There's research and then there's theft.
There's a line,
Yeah.
and there's definitely intellectual property theft, and I think the estimate is insanely high how much it costs us. Microsoft just alone, Microsoft's losses in China are, hundreds of billions of dollars.
Right.
So I'm sure that's happening.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Because
built on the backs of government subsidies. So that's another thing. It's not really fair to compete.
Yeah.
If they're dumping.
Yeah. Well, so having a non-Tesla electric vehicle that went awry on me here recently.
Whose name shall not be mentioned.
No, never again. I feel like there's probably not a U.S. based manufacturer that's going to be able to compete with that if it works at all well. Certainly on the price. Because did Chevy get rid of the Volt or no?
I think they shut the Volt down. Yeah,
The Volt. Okay, Nissan
so.
had the Leaf.
Yeah,
but these. Yeah.
Well, but they're doing things the old-fashioned way still, so they won't compete. Yeah. Now, whether Tesla competes, I guess China had adopted Musk's giga casting the body technique, which is a game changer in labor. The robotics are going to change everything. What happens with products and technology is you drive costs down to the raw materials, right? You have energy and labor and raw materials, and if the labor goes down, it's going to be significant. I mean, they're targeting Musk's. They're already working on. I think they're pretty close to finishing the design. Their next generation, forgot what they call it, the Theories Model 2, which is going to be like a $20,000 car. Tesla, and I think they're opening a factory in Mexico to produce it, but. Again, you compete with a Chinese car. I mean, it's going to take some percentage unless we outlaw it or make the tariff so high, it's going to take some percentage of the market.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And why would we outlaw it? What's the...
to protect American industry.
Okay. And
protectionist policies.
If we did that, are you for that then? So, because you're not free market on the...
I'm conflicted, right? So I was going to start in 2015. I was going to start a solar farm. And was getting pretty close in a lot of the engineering.
Which is funny to me because you're not like an eco...
I'm not an eco guy.
Yeah,
but it's technology that makes it... When it makes sense, it makes sense.
Okay.
Like LED bulbs, government forcing me to do that is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. We pay these guys $200,000 a year to sit there in Congress and debate. Telling me which light bulb I can buy is really completely stupid.
Okay, so you feel like there's merit.
But when it becomes economically viable and it's a better technology, it'll go fine, and it did.
Okay, right?
And same thing with solar. Solar is now completely viable, and especially with battery technology. And I can tell you, I had some installed a long time ago on a dock, and I'm putting a new system in a cottage in Canada.
So personally, you believe in it and use it.
The technology, yeah. And I wanted to do a solar farm at that time, and right at the time I'm planning this out, they put a tariff on Chinese panels, 160% or something crazy, which that eliminated it. And the argument there is, hey, they're dumping, right?
Yeah,
they're giving us, and it's an odd thing to me because I understand the argument, but let's say they were going to give them to us for free. It's wouldn't you take that? I can go both directions on the argument. But if they're going to give them to us for free, and we just pillage them for their resources, it seems like we come out of that deal better, right? On the other hand, if you're doing it in a way. And then, if you're Apple and you're using slave labor, did I say that? Child labor at Foxconn, whatever it is, and they have suicide nets. Suicide nets? Is that right?
Right. I think there's funky things that happen.
Yeah, they have people jump off the buildings at Foxconn, I believe, and so they put nets up to stop them from dying. Anyway. Yeah, I mean, there's clearly lines where you shouldn't finance your enemies or adversaries.
Yeah, but when I hear you say that, I'm thinking okay, an American company setting that up, they're probably going to set the manufacturing up over in China too.
I did it. I had a factory in China. I mean,
right.
I understand it, and it's funny because I went. It's not a black and white issue. There's a conflicted issue there. the people that work there, I mean, I had pictures of their little children. You know, they came out of a village, you know, and were poor. And
At a
now,
factory you set up.
yeah,
You stood up a
yeah,
factory.
and I communicated with one of them just not too long ago, and you know, they have the supply chain, they have the manufacturing. They at that time, you know, are willing to work for, you know, $4 an hour versus 15, 20 here. And I don't want any shouting of hypocrite because I recognize it, and everybody who will shout that is using Chinese products.
Yeah.
So I do recognize the inherent danger, and there should be a line. Should it be zero? Perhaps.
So-
but do know that you're making hundreds of millions of people. China brought 300 million people out of poverty since they initiated their market reforms.
So, are you
so
pro
our-
China?
You know, I'm not pro Chinese
Singing.
government. I'm pro.
Just giving
I'm
you a
pro,
hard time.
No, it's interesting because I'm pro people, right?
Yeah.
I think people are
And
We
people in the U.S. aren't the same as their government. People in
Yeah.
China aren't the same as their government.
right.
Yeah.
So there's governmental problems, and then there's humanity, and it's all intertwined and messy, and it's not as clear cut.
Okay, so break this down for me then. You hear this all the time, like reshore, build it in America. What are the
coming.
implications for that?
It's coming.
Do you want that? Is it good? You know,
Well, it's
should
good,
that be
It's
the
good
case?
for us, right? It's not as.
But is it
clean.
going to cost more? Because you're talking about it costs $4 an hour for that worker versus 15.
So what's happening with automation? It's the price is dropping. So two things have happened. I had this epiphany. I don't know if I ever shared this with you. I was laying on a couch once, looking up at a ceiling fan that had kind of a chandelier, had glass panels on it, and I realized those are really dirty. Those need to be cleaned. And it occurred to me that the time it would take to clean those, it would be cheaper to buy a new ceiling fan. So then I got to thinking about, okay, why is that? And it's like, well, the cost of labor overseas, blah, blah, blah. So I was kind of young at the time. And I had this realization. It's like, we have this differential will be arbitrage. This will be closed, right? Their label, our dollar per hour labor and our dollar per hour labor has to converge, and it has. And China's gone up, and it's not so cheap to do things in China
Not like it
anymore.
was.
And so it seeks out. And you know, if you think about that in a way, that putting the totalitarian communist state aside, it's pretty wonderful to help poor people, right? It doesn't matter if they have brown skin or white skin.
Yeah, it's not a race thing.
No, it's nice to help people.
But
And
now,
so if it moves from China to Vietnam to Lesotho,
okay,
you know, that's
Now,
not a bad thing.
you're sounding real liberal here.
I'm sounding liberal.
And
but
I just want to say,
it's honest.
what is a country?
Okay, well, that's
Are
different.
you
Yeah.
okay? Because this is a big debate right now. We're talking about globalism and, you know, different countries and how they work together.
Yeah.
And you know, I've heard it said, you know, if you don't have a border, you don't have a country, for instance. And I guess there's different kinds of borders. You know, there's the physical border, but then there's also what we're talking about with like trade and import, export, and digital. You know, so how does the idea of a nation and this word is being besmirched here recently? Like, you're a nationalist? Like, what? You know,
That's the new idea. Yeah. So I'll tell you my analogy again, putting it to people. And so, like, a father's responsible for their family, and it's probably important to monitor trade in that family with your kids, your external trade, and what your money is going, you know, your kids are spending their money on for a period of time. I think the same thing with a country, right? So I do believe our political leaders should be looking out for the interests of our country first. That's their job, right? If I want to take my philanthropy money and go donate to Doctors Without Borders and go help cleft palate surgery in, you know, Bangladesh, cool. But the governance, the Fed is responsible, federal government's responsible for taking care of our country. And they should be looking at that first and foremost. That's my take.
should be.
Should be.
Yeah. Yeah, I heard. I think it was Musk that said, you know, we have like 4% of the world's population, and if we let in just 1 more percent, it ruins everything. Like, we can't sustain that much population here. So, you're talking about, isn't it nice to lift people out of poverty and if we get, because that's the main argument on the left is like, well, you're mean, like if you don't let people come over.
Yeah, well, there's other ways to help, and you don't just control for material gain, right? Material, that's a big important thing in human flourishing, but you're also controlling for rule of law and culture, and that's, again, regardless of what they say, some cultures are better than other cultures.
Well,
Right.
and if you take a purely relativistic stance, you got this culture, that culture, and they're all equally good or
And
bad.
it's ridiculous.
But what's crazy is like, okay, if you do have all those cultures and you put them all together in a space, they're not just going to remain. They're in a bubble, and
Yeah.
and the bubbles aren't just going to nicely bounce off of each other. The cultures are going to do what they do,
Yeah.
and some of that is going to mess with the other cultures.
Did you follow Haiti at all?
Oh, a little
last
bit.
week?
Yeah, we haven't talked about that. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's some bad stuff going down there.
Haiti is a fascinating science experiment, being scientifically oriented. You try to control for many variables when you talk about things. Haiti and the Dominican Republic is just a great case study.
Because the same
in
island,
governance.
right?
Same island,
Okay.
same resources, same founding, same ethnicity, everything similar, except that Haiti fought for independence and then ruled themselves and have done really poorly at it.
Yeah.
Right? Their culture doesn't. And now we have cannibalistic gang going around and eating their enemies, like
Which
thousands of
the
people.
mainstream media denied. I saw letters from, I don't know if it was New York Times or Washington Post, contacting people on social media who said, now you said this, where's your proof? And so Musk posted a graphic video.
It was terrible.
Yeah.
It was terrible. It was terrible.
So yeah, and
And-
there's been interventions in Haiti before.
I remember Hollywood. I remember famous people. I think Trump said it was a hellhole, basically, using nicer language. I'm using nicer language than he did. And all of the people, started wearing T-shirts. Haiti's already great,
Right.
and so forth. And it's not.
Yeah.
It's not by any objective means. If you can show me one Hollywood star who immigrated to Haiti,
That's right.
then maybe
I saw
maybe I'll
Conan,
listen to you.
like floating out in the ocean, and he had said he had the shirt or he was saying something, and it's like, well, you're out in the ocean, no one's around, and
Yeah.
you're just talking about
Yeah.
the landscape. Is that what's so great about it?
I've been to the island. It's not good. It's not good in any. The resorts are nice.
And
'cause
what you're not saying
locked
is that
in,
you
you're
don't care about
You're
anybody.
fenced in, and you're living in this little idyllic beach world. While, I mean, they're terribly poor.
Yeah. It was like that in
it's
Jamaica
terrible.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and Jamaica's not as bad.
Right.
And yeah,
But you're not
Anyway.
saying you don't care about the people or that they're not valuable.
No, you do care, but
You're just
the
observing.
culture and the governance matters,
Right.
and that's a great example.
Yeah.
Right?
And what
Dominican Republic, you should Google it. The GDP per capita. Here, I'm gonna look right now. So you talk for a second.
Okay. Well, I saw, people were talking about how do you solve this? Number one, do you solve it? Do you need to intervene? Number two, what is the thing? Let a bunch of Haitians into America? We talked about the population thing already just a second ago. Do you colonize it? That's a bad word right now.
That's how it started.
Do you
and when
go
they,
in
when they threw off the colonizers in Haiti, it went to hell. And here's the numbers. Haiti. So remember, same people, same island, same resources, different governing. Haiti's PPP per capita output is $1,800. Okay, in the U.S. that's like 60 grand. Haiti is 20. I mean, Dominican Republic is 20 grand. 10 times greater gross domestic output, just based on their governance.
Yeah.
That matters.
Right.
That matters.
Yeah. So what's your
Solution? I don't have a solution for them. Get better governance.
But I guess on that interventionist front, are you required to intervene
Yes.
if you have it better?
I'm probably for colonizing, being a colonialist power.
Yeah. I mean, I saw people estimating like, here's how many troops and helicopters it would take to just bring order to the
Interesting.
place. So the question then is who should do it?
Well, so you speak about people. Do we care?
Right.
Yeah. Do you care about these people really? Well, and then the second question is, same thing as the Ukraine. Are we the world police, and should we be sending our people, our money, our treasury and blood? That's a tough question. That's a values question.
Yeah.
I've kind of, for a long time, I've said, if you have a volunteer army, military, then you should probably be more prone to helping the world.
Why is that?
Well, they're a standing army, so we're paying them anyway,
Mm-hmm.
right? They chose to do this, and maybe, I don't know if you really know what you're signing up for, but yeah, I mean, if my neighbor, I tell my kids, if your neighbor's beating his wife and no one will do anything about it, you go do something about it. That's a moral obligation.
It always comes back to morals and which set of morals is the set. You could say DEI is colonizing the America that was.
funny.
So it's not colonization
In the
principle.
traditional sense.
Yeah, or just even in principle that people don't like. So yes, if you care, how much? I guess you could ask it this way: how much do you believe in your beliefs, like the things that you care about and stuff?
Yeah.
Do you believe in it enough that you feel like it'd be beneficial to share, with other people?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many levels. It's like, will you help finance them? Will you go be active? Will you send your sons to die? I mean,
Right.
there's a whole range.
Yeah.
And Haiti's a great example. What another tragic situation not too far off our shores.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is interesting. Before we go any further, you said you wanted to bring up, just some of your entrepreneurial journey.
Oh.
Let's get into that, and we can
Yeah,
hit the news more after.
I was talking to someone. Entrepreneurialism is a train ride, right? It's there's ups and downs, and I had a period so I've almost always been an entrepreneur. I worked for a company for about a year post college, and after that, I was pretty much doing my own thing.
What was that in? I'm curious.
That I worked for.
Yeah, what was your one real job?
Yeah, so it was a billionaire. So I guess I did know a billionaire. Forgot about him. Billionaire guy from Lebanon who wanted to the French had these dumb terminals before the internet. France Telecom, a nationally owned company, because they're kind of socialist in France, had decided we don't want to print phone books anymore. And computer technology was such that they could make these little boxes, little keyboard, little screen, and you could look up a phone number. So like, we never have to print phone numbers. Give everybody one of these boxes. They can, it was over phone lines. It would go in. It would find the phone number. And entrepreneurs in France were like, wow, everybody's got these boxes. I could give them a weather report and maybe they'll pay me a little bit, right? I could give them stock quotes. I could make games, kind of a pre-internet internet.
Mm-hmm.
And so there were some industrious people around the world who were like, hey, we want to take this to other countries. And this guy wanted to bring it to the States. He brought it to Texas, actually, and that was my first job. I kind of worked in the R&D department for this guy. But ever since then, I've been an entrepreneur, and it's ups and downs. And there was a point where, like, I was going to lose the house that I built myself, like nailed all the nails. I mean, I spent an entire year full time building this house myself, and I was going to lose my house. And I told my wife that, I have to get a job. This is it. We're tapped out. Got to get a job. And she's like, no, we'll go live on a trailer. It doesn't matter what we have. It's that you got to do what you love, and you always have to be. And so things worked out. Fortunately, it was a cool thing. A company that I thought that I had started that was basically dead. I had a guy reach out to me, a CEO of a big company reach out and said, hey, you talked to me about this 6 years ago. You
Wow.
know, I want to talk again.
Yeah.
So I bought the company and just
Yeah.
like literally, perfect timing.
I feel like that's, as I hear you talking about this, it resonates, but I feel like that's part of the entrepreneurship thing is that you have high highs and low lows.
Low
Like the
lows.
lows are really low and the highs are really high.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's not a lot of in between.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're trading off a secure paycheck for the potential upside and not just the financial upside, but doing what you want to do.
Yeah.
That's a big deal. And I don't think it even has to be entrepreneurship, but I think it's so important to do what you enjoy. Don't do it for the paycheck.
Yeah.
Because in the end, who cares if your house is 2,500 square feet or 1,500 square feet? Or, I mean,
Yeah.
if you hate your life going to work for 40 hours a week,
Right.
is that worth it? Probably not.
Yeah. Yeah. I think to your point, entrepreneurship is not for everyone. And I was going to ask you, well, like who's it for? But I think the answer is the entrepreneurs just, they do what they're going to do. Like
Yeah.
you either are one or not. And
Yeah.
because you go out and start the thing, like
Yeah.
you can't help it. It's just like a lifestyle.
My wife was an entrepreneur. That's how we met. Her company became a client of my company, and we met. And she said early on, she said for her, it was going to prison. She like literally her earliest memory of work is, well, that's prison. I can't go to prison.
That's funny.
So it's whatever she could do to not go to prison.
Yeah.
was the deal. And
Yeah.
she couldn't understand it. But there's different personality types. Some people are very happy with it, and they like, they'll do the same job for 30 years, and that's
Right.
fine. But yeah, take stock. Your life is short. Take stock and try if you have the potential. Try to do
Yeah.
something you enjoy, and it doesn't matter about money. If you enjoy customer service and working in fast food, and because you run into people like that, they're just pleasant and nice, and they seem happy. Or maybe you'd prefer to be outdoors landscaping. The money part's not the thing. It's like finding the thing that you like.
Yeah. And what's funny is if you do the entrepreneurship thing, you're going to end up doing whatever you're doing anyways, like, and a bunch of other things too. Like
That's
if it's
right.
customer service or sales, like
That's
you
right.
do it all.
You wear all the hats.
But how did you deal with that? Like, is that the worst low that you experienced?
That was pretty low. I woke up with, one of the happiest people I know. My family will dispute that, but I think I'm pretty happy. But I remember waking up, and the first feeling I had was like adrenaline and cortisol and stress and anxiety, probably.
Yeah.
And maybe now they call those panic attacks. I don't
Right.
know. I kind of hate the whole idea of naming these things, but it was a hard time, and you just have to. At that time, I was not Catholic. I was not religious, and my technique was kind of cognitive. I never have gone to therapy or anything, but I would cognitively work through, okay, what's the worst case?
Mm-hmm.
The worst case was never as bad as your subconscious tells you.
Yeah.
It's not like they're gonna hang you or something,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's like I always told people I was always usually pretty happy, but see, at this time I had a family, more people depending on me.
Yeah.
But I always told people I worked at Taco John's, a fast food place called Taco John's when I was young, and Taco John's is like, you think working at Taco Bell is as low as it goes. Taco John's is lower than that. So it was, it was kind of bottom of the barrel, and I was happy. And I always told people I never was too stressed about things because I could always go work at Taco John's, right?
Yeah.
And life was fine. But anyway, it's a roller coaster, and
Yeah.
and you have to think about that. If just my main point is do what you enjoy, and everything works out.
Yeah, I think there's something to that. But it's an emotional thing. I remember my wife and we had a website, and it was going real well, and our traffic dried up basically overnight when an algorithm shifted, and we weren't getting search traffic that we were, and we were making a decent living just off of the ad revenue, And so people talk about this all the time. It's oversaid, but the failures, when you fail as an entrepreneur, you do learn something.
It's also visible.
Hopefully. Yeah,
Sometimes.
that's true. And sometimes,
Family, friends, etc.
yes, it's easy to beat yourself up. You can be like, well, am I a failure? You know, like, and that's rough. And then, but if you have enough experience, you're like, well, I've been through something like that. I will get through it again.
Yeah. And there's people out there. You've read that Abraham Lincoln's failure history. Did you ever see that?
No.
I can't quote it, but it's this. It starts out talking about this guy and how everything was a failure. Failure, bankruptcy, failure, failure. And then elected senator, elected president. You know, it's kind of a cool.
And that was true about his actual life.
Right.
That wasn't a parable. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I feel like that is part of the journey. And it's sort of, you hate to think of it as like gambling, right? Because you're after the big payoff. And I'm not necessarily talking about money, but you want to make it to the point where it's like things are set.
It's not just gambling because, like I said, you need to do something you enjoy. And probably ideally that is mission oriented. And even higher ideal than that is thinking big, is major transformational purpose.
Yes.
And not everybody's wired for that. But I think failure, circling back to our SpaceX conversation, that's Musk's modus operandi. It's like failure is good.
Yeah.
Don't look at this as bad. This was a good thing. Now we're going to learn
Right.
what caused that. And it's better to learn it now than when we have people aboard.
Yeah. And there's the famous light bulb quote. I'll
Edison.
butcher it, but he learned however hundreds of ways to not do the light
I never
bulb.
fail. I learned 10,000, and it was literally like 10,000 ways that didn't work.
Yeah. And there is something too, for me, I think in my entrepreneurial journey, oftentimes the things that I get up to have been like parachutes in a way. Like when I was in an actual job situation, like having a side project, it was a mental parachute as a way.
Yeah.
But also, like when I got fired from one of my previous jobs, it was an actual parachute where I could hop into that and have a softer landing. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's different when it's like one of your own actual things that you relied on is firing you, so to speak.
Yeah. Well, and if you have employees, it's hard to let people go. And so it's not.
Is that something that you've had to do sometimes? And not because they were bad employees, but because things weren't going well.
Yeah. And
so what's that like? I mean, as the boss?
That's a terrible thing. Usually, most people I've had to let go was because they were underperforming. They were like not good people. And I'm always really late to do that. But I don't like it either way.
Yeah.
So yeah, the hard. Everybody looks at the guy who makes the decisions and thinks, that's great. I want to do that. But until they get there and you realize it's not fun to make the hard decisions.
Right.
Fatherhood, anything.
Yeah. But someone's got to do it.
Someone's got to do it.
Yeah.
And, testifying to traditional Western values of marriage, it turns out it's not a bad thing in the way it's designed, because the men, if you look at parenting, women are usually much more attached and emotional about the children. And not that the dads aren't, but they're a little more removed. And in traditional systems, the father is the one who has, for at least thousands of years, the father's the one who ends up making the decisions.
Yeah.
And that's probably not a terrible thing because they're detached and less emotional and hopefully can make a better judgment. Now we're going to get a lot of hate from girls.
Well, so here's a segue into a tweet that I saw. Somebody posted a picture. It wasn't the Matrix. I think they used AI to do this, but it looked kind of like a scene out of the Matrix where there was a bunch of pods with babies obviously being grown in them. So I guess artificial wombs, just a big rows and rows and rows and rows. And the caption was "free market?" ? And, there's a big talk about in vitro fertilization, and stuff right now. And wow, when you think about people becoming commodities, it's a sobering thought of like, is this where we're at in society?
Another line to be drawn. It's like, where do you draw your line? Is it birth control? Is it IVF? Is it babies in artificial uteruses? Is it babies for sale? I mean, of course, everybody draws a line, and this is the thing. Nobody thinks about that. It's like, they don't. Yeah. Anyway.
Well, see, this is the sticking point for me. Is I was having a conversation with somebody, and I was explaining that I just don't like when the government compels somebody to do something, and they tried to flip that around, and they're like, "Well, what about the Roe v. Wade thing? Is that
Right.
the government compelling the
Yeah.
opposite
Yeah.
direction?"
It's a fair statement.
Yeah, but in a situation like this, with there's so many different tangents that come out of this image. Like, what is a person? Where does a person's value come from? And not to mention just like, should anyone be able to come in and buy a baby?
It seems bad.
Yeah.
Tell me about the compelling thing. As you've thought about it, what's your take on? So, I'm the same way. Like in the markets, I'm not about the government compelling any action.
Mm-hmm.
You shouldn't force me to buy something. Shouldn't force me to hire people. Shouldn't it's free market. Should morals be legislated?
Yeah. Well, this is the whole thing, right? You need a group of people who all agree on how things should operate. And if
if you all agree on a moral, you don't need the government. Maybe you do to enforce, but
yeah, because of humanity and how things are, you're going to need some laws, and whatever. But yeah, if you have a more or less homogenous group of people, that tends to agree at least on the basics of things. So I don't want to be compelled for like speech, for instance. That's not cool. Like, I want my free speech.
But you think people should be compelled not to abort babies?
Yeah, I don't know. So that's a whole big thing, right? So, and we had talked about this a little bit. If you
let's make it easier.
Edge cases, murder what?
The government should compel people not to murder.
Not to murder. Yeah. So basically, you're in talk about self-defense. Then you can murder if it's self-defense,
yeah, that's fine.
But then it's not really murder.
No, just like I'm going to go out and shoot my neighbor.
Yeah, you can't do that.
So you can't compel me on market things, but you can compel me on certain moral issues. Is that the thought?
Yeah. See, all of these are going to devolve into really sticky things. Someone out there is going to take the approach of like, well, if you're into like self-defense, well, then a mother maybe needs to defend herself against this embryo. There's the conversations
that's
get
crazy,
ridiculous.
I'd like to settle on the edge on the simple case, the elucidating case of, so government can't tell me that I can't fire my employees, but government can tell me I can't go murder someone. Is that right?
Yeah, for the purpose of your illustration, where's the line?
Yeah. Well, so my line, I think, is when it infringes on other people's rights. And that's where the left goes, well, the mother has rights. And, well, okay, but the baby does too. So then that's a different kind of case. But in the case, I can't go murder my neighbor because I'm infringing on him.
Well, that's we talked about this. That was like the COVID argument. It was like, I try to have an open mind. I was telling somebody about the vaccine, if someone wants it or not. And someone looked at me and said, but not if it's going to affect other people, not if it's going to hurt other people, So that's, I mean, you have to all agree basically on stuff.
Yeah.
And this is when
go ahead.
The phrase diversity is our strength.
No.
The splintering apart of everything is not a strength.
No.
It doesn't matter how you look at it. Unity is
coming
a strength.
apart.
Yeah.
Yeah. What's his name? Charles Murray. The book Coming Apart, if you haven't read it. Good book.
Yeah.
And we are coming apart, and he elucidates it pretty clearly.
Yeah. So I don't think we've answered any of the questions that we've asked.
No. But I think what it comes down to is, again, there is objective morality. And not that there aren't questions that need to be interpreted in there, but there is objective morality, and there should be...
Well, what do you mean by that? If you mean that people feel like there's right and wrong, I think that's true.
Yeah, there is right and wrong.
But people are going to... But unfortunately, people will think different things are right.
Yeah, some people don't agree with that.
There is right and wrong.
That's kind of irrelevant in my mind.
Okay.
They can think that they They can think that something is right that is wrong. That doesn't change the fact that it's still wrong.
But now
Right.
it's down to
You do
whoever's
have
in power.
you do have a governance problem. So now what you need to do is make sure you have a governing system that can tolerate that situation. So I know people who are into the idea of theocracy, right? And
Or aristocracy. I've seen that coming up a lot too.
yeah, aristocracy is probably a little more tolerant. Theocracy evokes the image of the mullahs in Iran, and in fact, there's a famous Harvard professor who's an integralist. Basically, says we need to take Catholicism and implant it in governing.
Which you bring up as because I mean, on its face, everyone's gonna be like, no,
Yeah.
no one wants that.
Well, that's the way I am when they bring up theocracy. It's like, well, okay, maybe if you get a great, leader, that's going to be a good
Yeah.
time. But throughout every part of history, you have bad leaders in
Yeah.
church, in secular society, whoever.
Yeah.
And then it's going to be terrible. So
Yeah, that's the problem. There's no perfect system.
Yeah.
And if you had at least a democratic republic with checks and balances,
Yeah.
it's when someone wants to blow that up. Somebody phrased it like this: if they don't want to play ball, then there goes the game. And that's an interesting thing because there is this idea that if there's rules and we need to abide by them, and we all agree about that, and when things don't go my way, fine. At least I'll have a chance another 4 years.
Yeah, right.
We can elect different people. But if you're not going to play by the rules, or you don't even agree
Yeah.
that there's rules, or you're willing to do any possible thing to win,
And that's the problem.
it's over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That is the problem. And feels like we're getting closer to that.
It feels like it might be upon us without even realizing it fully because
yeah.
it happens so
Maybe
slowly.
we passed that. Like I said, I think the majority of people don't have any qualms about lying.
Yeah.
I'd like a study on that. I'll have to remember to look that up. But I think most people don't have any issue with lying.
Yeah.
That's different I'm sure that's different than it was 100 years ago.
Yeah. It's scary to think, I saw somebody talking about, like where do things go? How do things get reset? How can we ever get back to like a stasis? And somebody was like, hey, historically, the way things get solved is with war.
Yeah.
And I don't like that, but I think, like, I'm not advocating for it. I don't want that. But I think looking back, it's like, well, how else does such a splintered situation play out?
Yeah.
That is the thing that resets everything, unfortunately. And we're supposed to have politics to do war by a less violent means. That's the whole point of politics.
Yeah.
But if that's breaking down,
I'm afraid. I hope it doesn't go that way. I really, really hope it doesn't go that way. And maybe it won't. I think sometimes when, although Ukraine proved the opposite, I think sometimes when society has too much to lose, they don't engage in war. I could be totally wrong there.
hopefully. But I feel like we have like a Cold War going on, even within the U.S., like within our population.
Yeah.
So, if you take away, like, I can come up to your house with soldiers and like, confiscate or arrest you or whatever. Or I could also enact policies that bleed you dry with taxes
Do
or
the same thing.
Yeah. So is that any less of a quote unquote war? It's just fighting by different means, which could still have like deadly consequences.
Yeah. 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 No doubt. No doubt. It's kind of heavy and pessimistic for a techno optimist guy. But I've for a long time, probably 10, 15 years, I've said I'm optimistic on almost all things, but I'm pessimistic on the U.S. government. And I think the only way to solve that, I think Mark Levin I thought of it years and years ago, but then I read it a little later in a Mark Levin book, and his idea, I will say my idea I had was to use greed of the states against the federal government. So basically, if you had a constitutional convention and you got them all to agree to eliminate the income tax, right? We didn't have it for 140 years.
Right.
And you told them, hey, imagine state of Virginia that instead of a 6% state income tax, you could have a 20% income tax. Think of the power you would wield, right?
Uh-huh.
And the way you do that is 33 of you band together and you have a constitutional convention and you change the system. And now we push that power. We've talked about this before. We push that power down to the local level, or
Right.
at least the state level. Yeah. And now it makes a much bigger difference. It already makes a pretty big difference if I move from California to Texas.
Yeah.
Now it makes a huge difference. Now we have a whole 50 independent trials going on.
Yeah.
And people move and migrate, and the best system wins.
So balkanization,
Yeah.
basically.
Yeah. I mean, still have a federal government, but make it in the form that it was during our ascension. You know, during the 1800s, we became a superpower from nothing, but people and grit and determination in a harsh land with, you know, Indians killing us.
Yeah. I feel
And
like
us killing Indians,
So what would,
to be fair.
what would prevent the federal government from saying, hey, I'm just going to pick a random state that's not one of the hot button states, you know, like Montana. You can't do whatever you just tried to do, you know, to have more say in a matter. Because I feel like we've seen some of that in like Texas. Like they've been fighting over border stuff and control of like the park. And it almost is coming down to like, well, who's going
to stand off?
Yeah.
Mexican showdown.
And no one's been willing to do that so far, like federal versus, you know.
Well, constitutional crisis, you know, the way it would play out is it would go to SCOTUS. The Supreme Court would rule, you know, that's legally how you form a constitutional convention. And then we'd see if one party was willing to use the military in a bad way. But I think it might play out. Right? I think most of these people aren't, you know, if you're Saddam Hussein and your enemies win, you're going to be killed. So you're going to do some crazy ass things, right? To stay in power.
Yeah.
These people do some crazy things, but they probably aren't willing. Don't think they're going to die.
Yeah.
And they aren't probably willing to risk what they've accumulated on the backs of the taxpayers to stay in power. They'll probably, you know, if it's completely clear.
You know who Eric Prince is?
Prince, yeah.
Yeah.
Prince Capital. Am I thinking? I might be thinking of a show.
He had
Prince.
private security company that he ended up selling.
Oh,
I don't know if it's called Blackwater or whatever it was, but he was on the PBD podcast, and he's a conservative guy, and he was talking about maybe there's some things worth going to war over. Yeah. Now, I'm not promoting this, but he's like, maybe if it's worth going to war over the definition of what is a man and woman, you know, if we're gonna have that. And then the guy was like, what does that look like if there's some civil war? This is PBD. I don't know if you ever listen to him. Interesting guy. I think he came from Iran and he's a successful business person here now, also very conservative. He's got a talk show. But he was like, what does that look like? And he said, it'd be urban versus country, basically.
Sure.
And I think we talked about this. There was a leftist comedian. I forget, you know, who the guy was or what, but you know, he had like rainbow in the back and everything. And he was talking about, you know, these hillbillies with their guns and stuff think they can take on the government, and let's do a test. You know, you bring all your guns and 1,000 people, and we'll just have 2 people from the Air Force, you know, and hey, let's interview. Hey, what are you shooting here with? I got my AR. And what about you, sir? Well, just have a drone, you know.
Stinger missile.
Yeah. And so he was trying to, you know, set it up where it's like, there's no way you can fight against the government. It's pointless.
Yeah.
But then I heard Eric Prince talking. He's like,
that's not true.
He's like, it'd be a pretty bad place to be in a big city without any power.
Yeah. Or food.
Yeah. And it's like,
they would melt down in minutes.
It's like, oh, interesting. That's,
yeah.
You know, you don't have a drone, but.
And we have plenty of examples, you know, Russia trying to take Afghanistan in the 70s or 80s. I can't remember. You know, Ukraine holding out against Russia.
Yeah.
You know, it's we don't want to go there for sure,
no.
But you know, are there things to go to war over? I mean, I don't know. I keep saying that, you know, example of how Christian nationalism are not domestic terrorists is that, you know, a lot or most of them believe that 1 million children are being killed a year, abortions. And they don't go to war. They don't even really do much about it violently. So it kind of goes to the testament of how nonviolent the morality of Christianity
Yeah,
is.
if people start criminalizing half of the country or something, like that's not sustainable. It's not just not fair.
Yeah.
It's not sustainable, you know?
Well, I will say, I think I could be wrong. I mean, you look at the gulags with Russia, with Stalin, and I kind of want to think that we're fairly interdependent. You know, like you said, the cities are pretty dependent on Kansas and Nebraska for food. So, and Kansas and Nebraska are pretty conservative, and it's like, do you really pick a fight and go that far? Probably not. I don't know. Maybe
And
they're
yeah,
stupid and they do.
and
I don't know.
nobody in their right mind would want a conflict like that.
No.
But partly, I feel like people these days, they just don't know how good things have been. And it's like
Yeah.
when things are so good, then you start nitpicking.
And you forget what it could be, how bad it could be.
Yeah, and when you don't feel like you have any external threats, maybe as a country, you turn inwards. Maybe is that part of the deal? And
Yeah, you use the example of the snake eating his tail. I mean, yeah,
yeah,
you consume yourself. You have to find something to complain about and be miserable about. Maybe that's part of human nature.
yeah. Now this, you and I were talking earlier this week, and I brought up this thing called a Berna gun. It's not a gun. It's not classified as a gun, but it shoots. What it is it uses CO2. It's kind of like a BB gun on steroids, but it shoots.
Oh, they're
these
small.
balls.
No, like
Yeah,
paintballs.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
this is what it looks like, and you can look at it. But
Uh-huh.
so it shoots, yeah, almost like paintballs, but you can load it up with ammo
That's
is basically pepper spray in a ball. And so the idea is this is something that's not a gun. It's legal in all 50 states. You can travel with it on the interstate without having to worry about it. And I guess I want to get your take on
Are they sponsoring us? Giving
that.
us like 80 cents, 80 cents for this
Yeah, we
ad?
need to try. Well, let's see. How many viewers do we have? We can give them even a better bargain than that. But yeah, I mean, what's your take? So it's not a gun. And I feel like
Yeah.
almost like,
I like non-lethal defense.
well, I noticed they call it less lethal. They don't
Less
say
lethal.
less than lethal. It's
Probably-
less lethal.
Probably some lawyer got involved and was like, you can actually kill someone, so we should be careful about it. I
Yeah.
had when I used to live aboard a sailboat. My wife and I were sailing around the world, and I bought a taser for some self-defense.
Yeah.
So it's like I had guns on the boat, but I'm not like taking a rifle onto the islands that we visited, and
Right.
and so I had a taser, and I definitely like the idea of non-lethal, but
And you
I
tased
do-
yourself, right?
yeah, that was an accident. That was terrible. We won't go into that. That was embarrassing and terrible. And it works, by the way. Yeah, jolt, jolt, jolt. It's like, it's a pulse.
Would that make
You
you
know.
think twice now that you've experienced it before you got someone else or not really?
No, not at all.
No.
No, I mean, it wasn't. Yeah.
So
But
you're saying there's a place for this sort of a
I
thing.
think so. But, if you're in a situation, yeah, just my own morality probably is. I think there's some hardcore people who would say, and these are the people who say, when you shoot at the torso and you unload all of it. Because if you're in a position that you're going to do that, you got to make sure it's done right. That's pretty hardcore. If I'm in a position and I feel like a taser will do the job, I think I prefer that.
Yeah. Well, so here's the thing. This is why I bring this up. There was a lawyer. He's like a gun activist lawyer guy. So I don't know. I saw a video and he was like, if you get surrounded your car by a mob, what can you do? And basically, he's like, the laws are different in all states.
That'd be interesting.
Yeah, but there's a really high bar for what qualifies even as self-defense. Like, there's people all around your car. You can't just accelerate and knock them all out of the way because then
You have to feel threatened. And
that's right. So you got to it's on you
Yeah.
to be as defensive as possible. But it basically came down to until they start breaking your windows and coming in the car,
Yeah.
you don't even have a prayer of not getting in trouble for using a weapon,
Interesting.
to survive. So it's like the bar is so high for when you can use an
Yeah.
actual gun. But I was thinking something like this, you pop a couple pepper shots on the pavement or something and, disperse a crowd. It could be useful in that sort of
Maybe. I
situation.
don't think they have that much of a range, do they? The radius of the pepper?
Well, the reviews, you can look up online.
Okay.
People have taken a few shots to like demonstrate.
Yeah, I imagine if it's here, I'm in trouble, but if it's down there, I'm probably not. Just because I've
Yeah.
seen like police canisters, and I don't think they're quite that effective. But
Yeah.
yeah, there was. You remember the Charlottesville riots, the fine people hoax?
Yeah.
There was a kid who drove and ran over someone, and a lot of video analysis. I remember in the day looking back, and they were beating on his car, and he accelerated and hit someone
Yeah.
trying to get out of there. And I think they charged him. I think they successfully charged him. But I mean, mobs are scary, scary things. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, just stay away. That's what I've always advised my kids. Like even you see it a lot in Europe in sporting event in their soccer games. Every once in a while, you'll just see this crazy mob and just violence and destruction. And they aren't at war; they're just watching an athletic event. And
Right.
I think mob mentality kind of goes crazy, and you
Yeah.
just got to stay away.
Yeah. Yeah. And well, that's an interesting. See, now if you zoom out, that brings up the bigger picture. Why is something like this okay in California? Like California, it's almost like they would promote this, because the whole Second Amendment thing, like the government doesn't
That's interesting.
take your guns or whatever because like it turns out like having people with weapons is like a pretty good deterrent for things. But people, if the whole population was armed with something like this, that doesn't pose any threat to a government. You know what I mean?
Yeah, interesting.
There's a reason California is cool with it, is what I'm saying,
Yeah,
probably.
yeah. I've never really thought about that. Well, they have their line at death, not self-defense, apparently.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I feel like in California, you get in trouble for anything and everything. Thought crime, basically.
thought crime. It's coming. Minority Report. I should go back and look at that movie sometime.
Yeah.
You watched it?
Yeah,
years
it's
ago?
been a long time.
Yeah, yeah.
precogs.
Precogs. There it is. Preemptively handling
I
crime.
think though that in certain places in Europe, this is becoming an actual potential threat. And in Canada, Peterson was kind of talking about this,
Yeah.
where not only can something that you said get you in jail for like a year. There was some guy being covered this week. Did you see this? He had like sent a private message with a meme to somebody in a private message.
Really?
And he's going to jail for a year because it was deemed racist.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
In Canada?
For a year. No, this is in Europe somewhere.
Yeah,
And
England.
Canada has its own issues.
England, it's really interesting. We are probably the country with the strongest freedom of speech laws. And that's so important. You see people you post something on Facebook in England and you're going to jail. You're a little old lady and you're going to jail because you posted something on Facebook.
Right.
And the thought of that is so terrible in my mind. I mean, that just gives so much control to government and takes away freedom that I think we can't, and we are. This hate speech. I don't know if is it legislated? I mean, it's talked about all the time. Hate speech. I think it
Overseas or here?
is. Here.
Yeah.
I mean, we can't dabble in that. It's
It
like,
all comes down to
No.
to the definition.
yeah.
Who gets to say what
Yeah,
qualifies
no.
as hate speech or not?
No, and we've had Supreme Court rulings on freedom of speech, and there is some limitation. The fire in the crowded theater, but I don't think we can go there. I don't think we should abridge that at all. Your ability to speak, even if you dislike it, that's tough.
Yeah, but that's what it feels like is happening in the country is one side of the aisle, let's say, is gaining so much power that they can enforce is the way their morality and
they can
ethics.
do that because we've stopped educating the populace to understand the importance, the underlying foundations of those beliefs.
Well, so that's a big topic. How much does knowing your own history personally, as a country, whatever groups you may be part of, factor into what you will allow to happen in modern day?
I think it's the basis for everything. I think it's so important to understand. And I'll use the example of the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church about 60 years ago kind of changed things up. And the Catholic Church has something called catechism. You go through as a kid and learn about the history of the church and, the beliefs, the doctrine, the dogma. And about 60 years ago, they kind of stopped teaching it, and it's more important we use construction paper and cut out flowers and glue flowers as children rather than learn this stuff. And I think we've seen in the public schools about civics and U.S. government. And once you do that, you can lead people to believe, whatever you tell them.
Yeah. Well,
And
it's
now
the
you can get their votes. And now, like you said, in a non-violent warfare, you can
Yeah.
deprive them of rights.
it's the question of who am I? And if you are just told this is who you are, and it's totally divorced from any actual history about you and your location and the people that directly came before you and were around, and well, then you are just completely moldable and impressionable. But if you're like, oh wait, here's my lineage, and here are things that mattered to
Yeah.
people in my past, and it's not just the current stuff that everyone's telling me. Like that literally is almost everything.
Well, and we've shattered that. We all move apart. Families dissipate, and we don't have that continuity of that lineage, like you said. So,
But just like, and you're talking about everyone being atomized. It's like, well, if you didn't have any connection to the history or past, or if you're told alternatively only about quote unquote bad things that your history or past might have contained, your lineage, who are you going to think you are?
yeah.
You're going to think I'm a piece of garbage and I need to step out of the way, and we need to
Yeah.
let this new government system take over. And
This is a little bit off topic, going back a little bit, but I think it's important to think about if we had maintained our family structures the way, and you see it a lot in Jews, you see it in Italians more. There's certain families that are better at maintaining this continuity. Think about it. If you're in a job and you're having anxiety that you're going to get fired because you hate it and their boss doesn't like you, right now you just have a miserable life. You start popping the SSRIs and you're barely existing, you're trying and you're afraid. And if you had a family support structure where it's like, don't worry about it, we'll live here and we'll, and find another one in a few months, whatever. I imagine that would change things. If we didn't feel this constant pressure that I'm on the street if I don't get the next paycheck.
mm-hmm.
That's a handcuff. That's handcuffs right there.
Yeah. Well, that's why so many different influential people, be it economists or theologians or other people throughout history, have said the basic building block of a country is the family unit, the traditional family unit. Yeah, because just that support system, that basically. So if you are, just single and being told that that's the way to happiness, doesn't matter if man or woman, whatever, or any other sort of lifestyle that blows up the traditional family. I mean, it's you're missing out on support stuff.
Here's some birth control. Freeze your embryos. Now go work at Citibank.
Right. Or sterilization for different things.
Yeah. I saw an interesting graph a few months ago. The single most important voting block for Democrats is unmarried women. That's everything. That's all it's about. And so there's a perverse incentive for Democrats to keep women unmarried and dependent on the government.
Interesting. And I've seen other graphs.
That seems like that's all they do.
Well,
Right? I mean, they promote through, and they started this early. I remember being a young man. I was probably 16. I'm working in a transmission shop, and a Hispanic mother was talking to my grandfather, and she was literally talking. There was a WIC office, Women, Infants, Children, so a social program, and she was literally talking about how she's not married, and if she has 2 more kids, she would get this much more money from the government. And that was what she did. She just kept making children as a single mother to get more benefits. And I literally saw this happening. It wasn't some theoretical thing that some right-wingers, I wasn't even probably that political at the time.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm watching this happen. That seems to be a recipe for a disaster. right?
And combine that with the idea that we talked about a few podcasts ago, like ask questions, and whoever doesn't want you to ask questions about anything, that's a red flag.
Shut up, whoever
Yeah.
tells you to shut up.
So
Shut up.
none of us were just
Racist, homophobe, shut up.
yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. That's right. So that silence. But it's important to question and to be like, well, why are things the way that they are? Why is the data the way that it is? You look at a chart. Okay, why is that the case? Right. Okay, go back and see
And
what are
who
the
published the chart, and can I
Yeah.
trust the chart?
Yes.
And and like you said though, it's really kind of problematic in that most people don't have enough time to become experts on everything or go deep enough. So I guess they have to find proxies to trust, and that's where we're at.
Yeah.
That's where
Everyone outsources some level of thinking, because that's what we call the information diet. Yeah.
So here's an interesting thing. I saw Chris Cuomo. You're familiar, that old CNN guy. Interview or discussion with Tucker Carlson. So really, salt and pepper there. This is going to be wild to watch. Water and vinegar, water and oil, whatever it is. Chris Cuomo he was, disagree with most things he said, but he talked about January 6th, the insurrection. He's like, yeah, my side's going to hate me for this, but that wasn't an insurrection. This is the most armed group of people in the country, and they didn't bring arms. If your intent is to overthrow the government, and I've been saying this, but if your intent is to overthrow the government and you are the most armed population, you're probably going to bring weapons.
Yeah.
But yet, half the country has heard the opposite and 100% believes that was an insurrection.
Yeah.
And that's trouble. That's such a there's so many of these. There's such a black and white thing. And if you can't agree on that type of thing, which is, we have reality, we have infinite video footage, you have common sense.
Well, so
What do you do?
yeah, the problem is, I guess you could call that propaganda. And I want to be fair and say, I think that people on the right can produce some propaganda.
Absolutely.
People on the left. But it does come down to the individual. What you don't see a lot of is somebody saying, what are the two sides of this? They've just kind of parked in a lane, and whatever the source is telling them, they absorb it. But I did see an interesting conversation about quote unquote Gamergate 2.0. Did you pick up on any of this?
Gamergate, no.
So, long story short, it sounds like the government has been getting involved. This is coming from Mike Benz too. So, with trying to influence people through video games. And you wouldn't realize this. And I've seen some of this actually firsthand. I can talk about that, but you wouldn't realize this. He said, I think the music industry and the movie industry combined are smaller than the video game industry right now. So it's very, very influential, particularly with younger people. And so the government, long story short, kind of wants to cut out anything conservative leaning or, patriotic kind of, and then that gets baked into the plots of these things. Now, I've actually noticed this as I've been looking through even just the Apple Arcade, game library. That's basically every plot is just basically a progressive plot for every video. It doesn't matter if it's like a puzzle or now I'm saying it's probably 90%. There's very little that is just like a straight up game, for entertainment or whatever. And I actually sat in on a meeting with a developer one time, and they were showing off the game, and it was just crazy how it was all about tearing down traditional stuff. But it's military games. It's just every genre of game is being pumped with propaganda, basically.
Wow.
And this is another kind of thing where someone would, if I'm telling them this,
conspiracy theorist.
Absolutely.
Shut up.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, Hollywood had, I don't remember what it was called, but they had policy guidelines up into maybe the 50s where if you showed crime or criminal, you had to show that they were punished at the end, that they lost. That was actually part of the screen deal. You couldn't show that, and that's, you couldn't show people in bed together. You had to have two beds, or one foot had to be on the floor. It was all these rules. But how much, again, freedom of speech. There's some tough
Yeah, but
things
that's
to
the
figure out.
problem. If it's you hear a lot about the government accomplishing things through private companies that it can't do outright itself because that's out like
The CIA has so many front companies.
yeah, I mean, however you want to, and I know when you bring up like the CIA, it does sound like a conspiracy
Yeah,
theory,
well,
like
it's true. Well, we don't have to go to the CIA. We can go to Twitter. Right?
Right.
We have the Twitter files. We have the emails. We know that the administration was having meetings, or the Dems, the agencies, FBI and CIA were having meetings with them, telling them that they couldn't put certain things on.
yeah,
I mean, that's documented. So,
that's a fact.
yeah.
But then, yeah, I feel like maybe do you think that the younger generations gravitate to? So going back to the graphs, I know you were talking about women. It sounds like from a lot of the data I've seen that more men are becoming more conservative.
More men, and surprisingly younger men.
Yeah.
And younger men, black men, the ones that aren't are Asian, I think, is the deal. So, but yeah, it's that's heartening for me that the
Well,
younger,
is it?
because that we're becoming more conservative.
But if the
young
two
people are.
sexes are sort of diverging,
Yeah,
how are they?
There's a big divergence too. You can look at the graphs.
Yeah, that spells trouble. It seems like.
It's trouble. The whole thing's trouble. I'm gonna give up now after today's discussion.
No, we need a whole segment
Should-
that we always end with that's a positive note.
Shall we? We'll leave it on a negative note this time.
Okay.
Next week, come back for a refreshing, optimistic
Okay.
view of
All
the
right.
world.
Yeah, it's always going to start out real positive and tend towards the realistic.
Yeah. No, there's a lot to be excited about.
Yep,
There's a lot.
definitely.